Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Dave Zapponi, and I'm the CEO of ECHO, the Educational Council of Homeowners, or the Executive Council of Homeowners. ECHO's been around for almost 50 years now. So thank you all for coming today, this Saturday, and participating in our Ask the Experts on solar and electric vehicle charging fundamentals. ECHO is a statewide nonprofit association established to support HOA board members and engaged homeowners. Our mission is to foster a better quality of life in community associations through education, advocacy, and connections. For today's event, we have a few housekeeping items. You'll find these on your monitors now. Please take a moment to review our housekeeping items. Please use the chat icon to report technical issues and to communicate directly with the other participants in the webinar. Today, we have a large audience of HOA board members. We will do our best to answer the questions, but we may run out of time and not be able to do so. During the presentation, we monitor the Q&A feature for questions. To help us select the most relevant questions, please use the thumbs up icon found in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the page. Simply click the upvote icon to vote for your favorite questions. We will use this vote tally to select the questions in the Q&A section. Please keep your questions general in nature and short. Questions about specific situations are better asked of your attorney serving your association and or another industry qualified professional or expert familiar with your situation. I will respond in writing to some questions in the Q&A feature during the presentation. All other questions will be answered during the Q&A session after each general session. The panelists will be available, all panelists will be available to answer questions during the respective 3 Q&A sessions. Please keep your questions and responses short and concise so we can address as many as possible in the time available. Complex questions will likely not be addressed. Now, let me direct your attention to your monitor where you will find our disclaimer. None of what is said during this seminar shall be construed as specific legal expert or expert advice from the speaker, sponsors, or ECHO. If you wish specific advice, we encourage you to contact your attorney or another suitable expert. This information, the information we provide during this webinar is educational in nature and should not be relied upon for specific decision-making purposes. Thank you. Today, we have several sponsors. Please join me in thanking our premier sponsors, Heritage Bank of Commerce and Silver Creek Association Management. Our Q&A sponsors are CID Consortium, LLC, Levy Erlinger and Company, LLP, CPAs, and Kevin Boland Insurance Agency. Registration sponsors, the registration sponsor is George Peterson Insurance Agency. And now we will hear a few words from Silver Creek Association Management, Laura Ravazza. Laura?
Hi, I'm Laura Ravazza with Silver Creek Association Management. Our core mission at Silver Creek and the touchstone of everything we do is to manage communities with its people in mind. That means we don't just aim to check off standard management boxes, but to listen and cater to the unique individual needs of each and every member of a community. We believe in enhancing the livelihood of communities through our unparalleled dedication to customer service, our ability to offer professional expertise in all areas of HOA management, and our tireless drive to ensure that the communities we take care of are heard, happy, safe, and thriving. We aim to consistently go above and beyond the confines of typical HOA management duties. It's because we genuinely care about how your community functions. We understand that managing a community can be a demanding responsibility, but our team of experts understands how to get things done with efficiency and finesse. Please let us know how we can help you and your community. I hope you have a great education workshop today.
Great. Thank you, Laura, and the Silver Creek Association Management Company. We appreciate their sponsorship. And now we'll hear a few words from our second premier sponsor, the Heritage Bank of Commerce. Chris?
Great. Hello, everyone. So happy to be here. Heritage Bank of Commerce is a premier relationship-based business bank in the Greater Bay Area. We have 18 locations throughout the Bay Area, and we have a dedicated HOA specialty banking department. We thrive on relationship-based clients, and we offer very specific services for homeowners associations like yours. You can see from the screen, we have deposit services. Right now, the reserves and for your excess reserves, we have wonderful CD placement rates. It's a one-stop shop service, and those rates are looking really good, between the high 3s and 4% for placing CDs for your association. We offer loans as well, and especially if you're considering doing an enhancement and adding solar to your associations, we are here for you to fund that project for you. So thank you so much, and enjoy this presentation today.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. We really appreciate the support of Heritage Bank of Commerce, and to all of our sponsors for underwriting the ECHO Ask the Expert webinar. Today, we will be joined by 5 presenters who will be speaking during our 4 general sessions. The session number 1, Sue Aiken and Bert Schraga from Oakmont Village Association. Our second session speaker will be Angela Lipanovich, Esquire from Estriatos Law. And then we have Dean Seise from EV Connect, and Bill Erlinger from CPA from Levy Erlinger and Company LLC CPAs. First, I would like to do a special introduction for fellow HOAers, Sue Aiken and Bert Schraga from Oakmont Village in the Sonoma Valley. Before we learn a little more about their subject matter, from the subject matter experts. Sue Aiken received her MA in Career Development in 1982 from John F. Kennedy University, established Square One Career Services for working adults, especially women, in Oakland, California. She taught career courses for the Piedmont School District and delivered workshops and transition programs for attorneys. She was also chair of the graduate program in career development at the John F. Kennedy University School of Management before moving to Oakmont Village in 2017. At Oakmont Village, she is involved in a variety of clubs, boards, and committees, including the Oakmont Residential Energy Committee. Bert Schraga is the retired CEO of Bell Electrical Supply, where he worked for 45 years. He served as a board member for 25 years on the National Association of Electrical Distributors. He was also on the board of the Electrical Distributors Insurance Company for 20 years, concluding his service as chair of the association. Since then, Bert has contributed to numerous HOA boards and many committees at Oakmont Village Association. We thank both Bert and Sue for coming here today to share their experience with developing an electrical energy program at Oakmont Village. Our experts here today will give you a brief introduction before giving their presentation. All the experts will be available to answer questions after the plenary sessions. Unfortunately, Angela Lipanovich will need to leave the program early today after her second Q&A session. We will now hear from our experts in the order of their presentations. First, we'll start with Angela. Angela?
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to meet you all virtually. I'm Angela Lipanovich, a clean tech attorney and founder of Estriatos Law. I've worked as an attorney specializing in solar for over 18 years. Originally, I went to law school to practice environmental litigation. And then in my 3rd year of law school, I realized that I could spend 5 years getting one power plant to comply with their Clean Air Act permit, or I could work on a solution. So I changed my focus to solar. My first job out of law school was working as the general counsel for a solar company that had just gone public. At the first solar conference that I ever attended 18 years ago, there were a lot of hippies, people wearing Birkenstocks with socks. Not the best look, but their hearts were in the right place. Now for that same solar conference, 18 years later, there are only 5 convention centers in the entire United States that are large enough for it. And there are people in suits as far as the eye can see. The reason I work on distributed generation solar, which is the type of solar that is installed on homes and businesses versus utility scale solar, is that it not only serves environmental goals, but also provides personal energy security and serves social justice issues by helping people keep money that they would otherwise be paying to large utilities. My office is located in Santa Cruz, where I live with my family. I've heard some great things about this organization and all of you, and I can't wait to share what I know and engage in a fun Q&A afterwards.
Great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. And now we'll go to Dean Seiss. Will introduce himself and talk to you a little bit more about his employer, EV Connect. Dean?
Yeah. Hey, thanks, David. Very excited to be here to discuss EV charging. I'm an account executive at EV Connect. EV Connect is one of the leading network providers for commercial charging stations. So I'm an expert in the commercial setting. I do not work in the residential home use charging market. So definitely happy to answer any questions today regarding multifamily EV charging and take a deep dive into how these projects works and how we can all do our part by enabling a better planet by enabling electricity as a fuel source. I wanted to get into EV charging because I'm passionate about the environment and I see the need for it in the future. So super excited to be here.
Thank you so much. We appreciate the introduction. And now Bill Erlinger from William Erlinger or Levy Erlinger Company, and take it away, Bill. Just a little bit.
Thank you. Sure. Thanks, Dave. I'm unmuted. Good morning, all, and thank you very much for taking your time today to listen in on this use word exciting, or I won't use something that's kind of humorous, that presentation today. And my part really is going to be to speak on the limited application of income taxes in this area as it applies to homeowners associations, and not to give personal tax advice. Our firm specializes, our only clientele are homeowners associations, and primarily in Northern California. We've been doing this for more than 30 years, and that means, yes, I have been doing this for about that long. So with that, I'll turn it over to back to David. That's good. Okay.
Back to me, and then we will go ahead and start session number 1. So let's start today and by asking Sue and Bert to tell us a little bit more about their renewable energy experience at Oakmont Village. And Sue and Bert, take it away.
Thank you. I'm going to start off, and then Bert will pick up the second half. You might be wondering why an English major, high school teacher, career counselor would be involved in solar project, because I'm the least techie person you could possibly find. But it is a commitment that I have had for quite a long time to the environment, and this interest has grown over the years, and especially now where we live in Sonoma, in the Valley of the Moon, which is based is in the city of Santa Rosa, but stretches between Santa Rosa and Sonoma. So it's a beautiful place, but in the last few years, it's been besieged since 2017 with some very nasty wildfires and accompanying blackouts. So solar does become of great interest. And going on to the next slide, just again, a general introduction and to this, we want to just tell the story of how to consider your own situation, your association, and what you might do, how to approach it. One thought is here is building it step by step in an informed HOA community. And that's really key. If they're not informed, it's not going to have a good outcome, or it may be much more of a struggle. We are an active 55 plus adult community, and I suspect there are several in this audience who might be from those types of organizations, but we're never too old to learn. And that's important because we are our committee, which no longer meets now, we've really done our job, is of course all volunteers. And not that we have tons of time, but we are at least in our active life, but we do have just incredibly versatile and informed and intelligent residents who have helped us with this. And we are, as I already said, we're located. Let's go on to the next slide in terms of some information about Oakmont. We're located on 1,500 acres with about 3,200 residences and some 4,720 residents. You can read this long, but our median age is about 71. We have had a tremendous amount of turnover since the pandemic, people leaving, but also homes being snatched up. And now the average age among that group is 65. Roughly 60% of the occupants here are female. 77% of the homes are owner occupied. This is critical because if you have a lot of homes that are rented or empty 6 months of the year, it's just understanding your demographics is extremely important here. Our average home price has really jumped up to $750,000 and more. Median income though is $62,000. So we have many single occupants here. So again, the impact of that on who and what needs the solar. And as I said before, we are heavily impacted. In 2017, this community, this county was completely unprepared for a wildfire, and the repercussions of that year are still being felt. Tremendous emotional impact, incredible destruction, and even a senior facility where the staff deserted them. So it's a lot to take in this new time that we're in. So let's talk about getting organized on the next slide. What's really important is to define what you are about. What is your mission? What's your passion here? You're going to need that passion to stay committed and do whatever it takes to complete your mission. So be very clear about your mission. And for us, it was looking at strictly residential solar and how we could promote this and among all those residents, so we would increase the number of homes with solar, how to educate them, how to bring in the professionals to help consult with us. So think about a committee with diversely skilled individuals. So being a career counselor, and a shout out to Diane, I saw you in the list there, people with diverse skills. So while you need people with incredible understanding of financing, the technology involved, you also need people who know how to communicate well with the community, who can put on an event, who are, that's the main thing. They understand the value of marketing. We're marketing to our community. Another group you must market to and have full support is your HOA board. Our group grew out of a long-range planning committee, which is a committee of the board, a board committee. That committee determined that there was an interest in solar, and they created a subgroup, and that eventually became its own committee, if you will. And you must keep the HOA board informed. We make regular reports to the board on our progress, the help that was needed, expectations, setbacks, resources, etc. They they must be a part of the decision-making process. Our committee, board committees always have a board liaison on it, and that is key to keeping the board informed. So, and finally, how to involve and educate the community members regularly. Articles in your paper, emails, invite them to town halls, bring in some experts, some consultants that can talk about it, get into the neighbors that maybe already have solar. This all needs a lot of education and commitment. Now, we also had an improved list of vendors, but I want to say very clearly that an HOA and the legal department here can handle this specifically, but we were never in a position to say this is the vendor you want to use, nothing of that sort. So by approved, here in Oakmont, the architecture office maintains a list of vendors that have been recommended by at least 3 residents in Oakmont. And vendors can be taken off that list if there are complaints. So this is a good starting point if you have such a list in your, and we have an architect office that approves all changes to the exteriors of homes and also in yards and a lot of things. So let's go on to the next slide, please, around more about involving your community. We found that members wanted solar, or they were very curious about it, or they knew absolutely nothing about it. Just who are your demographics? Who are who are you in your community? What do you think is the level of interest? If you need to do a survey or something, a needs assessment, perhaps do that. We have something called fireside chats where we can bring in people in small groups and answer questions. We didn't happen to use that this time around. Some people think that an HOA will be able to select a contractor and then get a deal. We had that in mind. We thought maybe there might be a couple of contractors that would then give us a deal, but HOA would not allow that. So we set up maybe 2 educational forums that where the speakers were in the profession itself, and they served as consultants to us. Very, very helpful. They were not there promoting their business. They were there promoting solar. And one was part of a professional association of people in that business. They reminded us of what we should be thinking about, what we should ask when a vendor came to our homes. So really basic, wonderful knowledge, and they can refer you to websites as well. And then the next thing we did was that we set up a solar fair we had about 10 vendors, and we included in that list both local companies as well as nationally known vendors. And it's really, be sure to look at your local companies. They're there in your community. So that's a lot different than when you're a national sized organization. Not saying one is better than the other, but I think having a balance there seemed to appeal to the people who attended. We were about to set up a second one when the pandemic came along, and that really curtailed future large events. However, on the Oakmont's website, we created an email list for anyone that was interested. We had a time when they could come and right on a computer sign up to be on the email list, which meant that we updated them regularly. We stayed in touch with them. It made them feel involved and special and raised their level of commitment, if you will. And of course, the website included information of a variety of things that whatever we felt was important. And you want to keep that current and alive, very vital. Make it a go-to place. Anything else you can think of in your particular HOA, meeting places that are great, whatever. You want to be present. Maybe you just have a table at some other event, but keep it out there. Okay, let's move on. Okay. All right, so Bert, I think this is turnover time.
All right, so my name is Bert Schraga. I was in the electrical wholesale business for 45 years and have been involved with solar projects for many, many years. I watched 20 years ago as solar started really catching on, panels coming over from China. Prices were going down to where when a distributor would get panels in, they had paid too much and they weren't competitive. Also, I saw a lot of defective issues with the Chinese panels. I got involved in Oakmont because somebody found out it came from the electrical wholesale industry. And I thought, well, this is a good time to get involved with some knowledge that I have. Now, I do want to say that the panels that are coming from overseas now we haven't seen any issues with problems, and people aren't going out of business anymore. In fact, the panels are becoming much more efficient. Almost every 4 or 5 months, they're including the wattage of panels to where you need less and less panels. Initially, I got involved with the energy resilience program here in Oakmont, to where we were looking at taking our 3 rec centers and going solar. And also we were looking at a microgrid, and the committee decided to spin off the residential part. And so that's how I got involved in the residential part. Sue mentioned that our first endeavor was to negotiate some pricing from some of the installers, and our board informed us that that was not legal. So then we really got involved, once again, as Sue mentioned, in the educational piece. And we learned a lot. Almost weekly, we would learn something. An example would be because more and more people want batteries, fire department approval became an issue. And that was not happening up until 2018, to where there was a whole set of new laws dealing with batteries, or as the industry calls it, storage. So what are some of the unknown PG&E fees and surprises? In our community, PG&E only charges us $10 to carry the electricity to our house. So we get all of our energy from the geysers through Sonoma Clean Power. So one of the things that we hear about is, and when people find out you're on the committee, then they start calling you. Well, do I buy or do I lease? And I think that the CPA is probably going to discuss that a little bit, because there are advantages to leasing and there are advantages to buying. I think that's between your tax man. And also, perhaps you might want to think about, from a real estate standpoint, does it add value to my home or does it detract? The SGIP program is a program that PG&E started funding years ago, and there's literally billions of dollars in the fund. So what the SGIP does, it will pay for storage if you have medical issues such as a CPAP machine or anything other that requires electricity in the case of a blackout. We've had, since I've lived here, we've had two times where we didn't have electricity for 10 days. We've had a couple for 3 days. And just last week, we had a 3-hour shutdown and a 2-hour shutdown. So more and more people in Oakmont have gone with batteries or storage. And I would say that probably half of the applications that we're getting now include batteries or storage. The SGIP program can be very rich. It can pay you up to $20,000 for 2 batteries. And depending on which batteries you're buying, that will more than pay for the cost of 2 batteries, which is about 30 kW. What we've found was a lot of the contractors didn't know how to apply for the SGIP money. I think it stands for Solar Incentive Program. So if you have a medical need for batteries, make sure you're dealing with somebody who knows how to apply for the money, because it can get very tricky. Roof conditions, depending on which contractor you talk to, some people will say, if you need a new roof in 5 years, you're probably not a good candidate. Some will say 10 years. I think that's something that's up between you and your solar company on when do you put on a new roof. Some of the solar companies have divisions that do roofs, so make sure that you do your homework. What we recommended in our educational programs is to build a questionnaire to ask the salespeople when they come out to talk to you about solar. Do they know what to do with SGIP? Do they do roof inspections? Do they have an app that you can see what's happening on your phone with your solar? So personally, what I did, I talked to 6 different companies before I picked somebody, and there was quite a difference in what they could do and wouldn't do. I, for one, did not want to run a separate load center for critical parts of my home. So some companies will run a separate panel for your refrigeration, for your computer, for perhaps any medical products that you have in the home. And I really wanted to run my whole house. And some of the companies wouldn't let me have enough battery power to where I could run my whole house. So I paid a little more for the batteries, but I didn't have to pay anything to run a separate load center. So that's important to think about. Another thing that we found out, that many of these homes are 50 and 60 years old. And when we had companies come out and look at our metering, found out that we didn't have big enough load centers or meter mains to actually run solar. So it required an investment of about $5,000 to get a new meter main. The average meter main in Oakmont was probably 100 amp, and many people had to install 125 amp. By the way, if you have an electrician put in the meter main in conduction, connected to your solar, that does apply for the tax credit. And maybe the CPA would like to address that as well. What else have we missed? Can we move on to the next slide? We think that in 2017, we had about 250 solar installations. Now we have over 500. And we don't know exactly because solar companies are supposed to get a permit from the city, but we've found a couple of solar companies that have bypassed going to the city. They also, in our community, they need to get a permit or an application from the architectural committee, and a few people bypass that. So our numbers aren't exact, but we're pretty close to over 500 installations. And as I think I mentioned earlier, probably half now of the people that are buying with batteries. I mentioned earlier the 3 parking lots. We've tried to find a company that will help us with batteries for the 3 parking lots. We've not been successful. We had to install a diesel backup system for our central community center because we feel it's important to have that community center up and running so people during a blackout can come and charge their phones and have a place to meet. The microgrid program, we've got a guy who's spending almost full time trying to get that off the ground. We've applied for various grants. So far, we've not been successful in getting grants. When is that going to happen? I can't tell you for sure. What would we do it again? Yes, we'd do it again. What we learned is do your homework. And it's nice to have somebody that you can talk to that really knows what we're doing. We have a lot of single women that get a little stuck on what they should do. So we've tried to open up a channel for those women and other people to where they can ask some key questions to key people. The aha moment, probably the biggest aha moment is finding how difficult it was to collect the SGIP money, because that's a lot of money, $20,000 for 2 batteries. It's a lot of money. I personally, I'm on my second EV. I have an 8 kW solar panel array, and I have 2 batteries. So I charge my car for nothing. I haven't paid a PG&E bill since my install over 2 years ago. And I run my house off of my batteries between 3 and 7, which is the key, the height of PG&E's metering. That pretty much has it for me, or does it for me.
Okay. Great. So I want to say thank you to Sue and Bert for their presentation. We're going to go into our Q&A session, and we'll take some questions now. I think we have a few. All the panelists, again, you're welcome to respond to these questions. I think there are a few in the Q&A feature currently. Let's take a second. I think we only have 3 in there right now, so let's go ahead and take those. Do not use the chat feature to ask your questions, please. We are looking at the Q&A feature, so we'll go ahead and ask Pat's question here. Please explain the difference between solar panels being installed on townhome roofs where the unit owns their roof versus panels put on condo roofs where a roof ownership is shared by all units and damage would be a shared expense. And maybe we'll be dealing with that, and maybe would you like to answer that, Sue? I see your hand. Yeah.
Well, I'll just start with one example. It's not quite on target with her, but about the shared roofs. I live in a triplex, and if I looked into a neighbor has actually put that solar on just his part of the roof, and he needs the approval of the other 2 homeowners in that area, in that triplex. And then we have these sub HOAs and HOAs, so all approvals needed to go with that. But it's so I was told, for instance, that in order to put solar up there, the roof would have to be replaced. Well, the only way I could do that, of course, is if the other 2 owners agree to do that. But it is allowable to put solar on your section of roofing. But Bert, you can give more details about that, but that is not an issue. It slows things down a little, but it's not insurmountable.
It's my understanding that the law, and I'm not an attorney, but the law states that you can't deny somebody solar.
Right. And I think Angela's going to talk a little bit about that in just a couple minutes here, right, Angela?
Yes, that's right. Maybe I'll just save my comments for that, for my presentation.
Okay, sounds good. And Valerie asked a really good question. What's a microgrid program? So Bert, I think you mentioned that.
So instead of paying Sonoma Clean Power and PG&E, we would have our own utility here in Oakmont. And so that requires a commitment from the people that already have solar installed. It requires a commitment of a certain amount of land where you could install more solar panels. And it's, I'm not an expert on it. I know very little other than it's very, very complicated. There is grant money out there. If anybody's familiar with Angwin, which is over by Napa, they have a microgrid to run their little community. But you know, I don't know.
Just to piggyback on that as well, a microgrid can be extremely small or extremely large. And really the definition is that it you have the ability to store and provide all of your own power needs on site. And it can be grid connected or it could be islanded, which means not even connected to the grid. But it basically means you can generate your own power, store your own power, and serve all your electric loads within its own confined like property boundary.
Right.
That's the definition of a microgrid.
I will just add one other note that has come up for us. Those who already have solar or were thinking about solar, if we get the microgrid, will they be a part of it? And the answer on that is yes. So that was might hold someone back. Well, shall I wait till the microgrid's in place? But it's, as Bert said, it's an enormous undertaking, costly. There's partnerships that are being looked at. It's very complicated. So I think if you want solar on your home, I would go for that and not worry about whether or not the microgrid will come to pass.
I think microgrids are going to become more popular, especially as emergency uses are needed. And it's a good way. You talked about having batteries for the community to go charge their phones and what have you. That's really important. And I lived in the Villages for a while in San Jose, and that was one of the concerns we had down there was some people had emergency needs for electricity, and you shut it off for a while, and it makes life really difficult. Okay, so do you have any residents that fought against your solar initiative? Anti-solars?
No,
No, I wouldn't say so.
no.
I mean,
One of the
not
things,
everybody's interested, but go ahead, Bert. I'm sorry.
well, one of the things that we did is we said we want the conduit to run in the attic. We don't want it exposed. And it's my understanding the law states that if the cost of running the conduit exceeds 10% of the cost of the job, then you can't require the homeowner to run it through the attic. And we got some resistance, and most of the companies were only charging $1,000 to run it into the attic. And that's where we got some resistance. People said, I want to run it on my roof, and I'm not going to comply with the policy.
And we in Oakmont had our own solar energy policy. I shouldn't say our own, but it's based entirely on Civil Code 714. And people had to sign on that. And it talks a lot about the mounting of the panels, the conduit that Bert is talking about. So people have to agree to these conditions in order to be approved to have solar on their homes. So no, that's a little different, but I don't think it didn't seem to bother anyone that their neighbor was getting solar. It did go through enough approval. And that's a heck of a lot better than having generators running in your neighborhood. I just want to say, but I don't think we had anyone blocking it or saying it wasn't appropriate. That didn't come up at all.
Yeah, now I have heard, and I get calls into the office on this matter, especially for EV charging stations. That's the biggest one. But solar for two reasons. The who owns the place where the mountings are and who's responsible for those. And so you get some pushback on that occasionally. Also sound. So a lot of folks don't like the sound of rain pitter pattering on the solar panels. And so they figure that's a problem. And so I'll get the individual calls for that. It's a very small number of those. And there are other complaints that we get, but I think the preponderance of the information, if you're well schooled in this and you do your homework, you can deal with most of those. And I know the laws has moved dramatically on the side of putting in solar, and we'll hear about that in just a couple of minutes here. And so here's an anonymous attendee who asks, Bert and Sue, can you share Oakmont's questionnaire mentioned in the discussion? Do you have that available that we can send out, or you know?
I don't know.
Okay.
So you keep everything.
We'll try to get it, but it's
Right.
fine.
It might be on a section of our website that is no longer available to the public, because that information now we're sort of done with our piece of it. So we'll ask about that, and if so, we'll send it to you for sure.
Yeah, if we can find it, we'll share it.
Yeah.
So Kara Moore asked a good question. When you're buying this, the technology improved rather rapidly, correct? And so how did you know when to buy, and how has the technology changed over the years? And you feel like, you bought an Edsel, and now the Mustang's out there, so.
The thing that changes pretty quickly is the amount of wattage that the panels put out.
Uh-huh.
When I bought, my panels are 320 watts. Now they're well over 400, which means you need less panels.
Yeah.
The inverters have changed. But I think you buy and you're going to save money as soon as you install, because you stop paying for your electricity.
Yeah, so you mentioned panels. I understand there's some panels out there in the market that had that had issues, fire, shorts, that kind of thing, aluminum wiring, that type of thing. Since you're in that industry, or were in that industry, do you have any comments on that?
I think those days are over.
Those days are over. Okay.
The stuff that's coming in now is, I don't have any issues with any of the manufacturers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if
Even the Canadian and the main, there's a lot of Canadian manufacturers and a lot of American manufacturers, but they're manufactured in China.
okay, and so if you have those older panels in, do those need to be replaced?
Only if it makes financial sense.
Okay.
But if you're not necessarily replaced. Some people add panels after the fact.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If they get an EV, they might want to add 12 panels.
Okay, sounds good. What about installing solar panels on the common area roofs and roof maintained by that? Did you look at putting the panels in on common area?
No,
Yeah,
this focus was just on
on
the
individual homes.
homes. Now the parking lots serve, if I'm correct, Bert, they serve the community buildings they're close to, correct?
The 3 rec centers, yes.
So that's already happened, but the panels are on structures that provide shade in
Right.
parking lots.
Parking
And there's a
structures.
little pushback from people who lived above them and having to look down on the structure, but it really didn't amount to very much. So they're just part of the scenery. You see them at schools and so many places. But that is how the buildings are being operated. We have 3 pools, but it does not cover the running of the pools.
Okay, sounds good. So you know what I'm going to do, because I just looked through most of the questions. If I could ask the participants here, the attendees, make sure that you do use your upvote so that we can pick the best, the most votes voted on questions first. That'd be great. I'm going to move on over to Angela now, because I think a lot of the questions will be answered in her presentation. So let's go ahead and move it over to Angela. I want to thank all of our Q&A sponsors today: Heritage Bank, Silver Creek Farmers Insurance, that's Kevin Boland's insurance agency, and CID Consortium, and of course, Levy Erlinger and Company LLP CPAs. And now Angela Lepanovich is going to say a few words about solar power and the renewable energy market. Go ahead, Mike.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to my presentation about solar rights at HOAs. As you will see, the theme for my presentation, which is also my view in general, is that solar power should be easy. I thought it fitting to use a picture of the sun on the cover as a reminder that we have one of the largest supplies of energy right above us. Much of the presentation will focus on how the law balances everyone's basic right to access this energy. As members of HOAs, and for those of you on HOA boards, your job is to create solar policies and rules that will not only follow the law correctly, but reflect the policy position that your HOA community wants to take on homeowner solar access rights. In my opinion, this is an extremely important issue statewide and nationwide, as I've literally seen countless instances of HOA boards not following the law and homeowner complaints about their frustrations trying to access their solar rights. Next slide, please. Can you go back to the disclaimer? Sorry. This is a standard disclaimer. Read it at your leisure, abide by it, or else. Just kidding. But please do read it. ECHO and its members can use the presentation for their own purposes, but beyond that, it's not allowed. Next slide. So my goal is that by the end of this presentation, you will understand enough about the technology, market, and law of solar to develop solar rules and policies for your communities that are compliant with the law and well thought out for the future. We'll first review the basic technologies, terminologies, and facts needed to understand and develop solar policies. Then we'll review the general market data so that you can understand how to develop policies that meet present needs and prepare for the future. I'll do a basic overview of the California Solar Rights Act. That's the law that sets the rules for how HOAs can restrict solar and homeowner rights. I'll provide a much briefer overview of a similar set of laws that govern homeowner rights to install EV chargers in HOAs. And then after these overviews, I'll review some real examples of different things that I've seen HOAs do and what's permissible and not permissible under the law. Last, I'll provide a few suggestions on where to go from here. HOA boards are responsible for creating and enforcing solar policies in their communities. In my experience working with owners and boards, I've seen countless times where the basic fundamentals of solar are misunderstood. It is truly impossible to talk about the law of solar and solar policies without understanding some basic fundamentals in market data. So these first two agenda topics we're going to go over are very important. Next slide. We'll now review the basic technologies, terminologies, and facts needed to understand and develop solar policies. So here's an overview of a simple rooftop solar system. It's simple and it's not a bomb. And I say that jokingly, but I say that because I've seen some agreements and policies where you'd think the person writing it treated it like a bomb. Solar power systems simply convert sunlight directly into electric energy. The cells are made of silicon with thin frames, a backsheet, small junction boxes on the back, and a mounting system. These are not heavy items. Wire is run from the system to the house's electric box, where an inverter turns the solar energy into AC current that is then fed to the grid. It's projected that in California, a solar system increases the value of property on average by about $5.50 per watt on a home's resale value. So in other words, an extremely small 3.1 kilowatt solar system would increase a home's value by approximately $17,000. Next slide. So this is a close-up of the mounting system. There are different versions, but they're all fairly similar. There are small attachments that are made to the roof and a racking system to hold the solar panels in place. Again, it's lightweight and it's not a bomb. I emphasize that. The other issue that I see a lot is concerns about the penetrations causing leaks. And in my 18 years working as a solar attorney, I've only dealt with 2 leaking roof issues that were resolved. It's just extremely rare that that comes up. Next slide. So when people talk about solar, you'll often hear this term net energy metering or NEM. With solar, your meter really does run backwards. During the day, most solar customers produce more electricity than they consume. And net metering is a billing mechanism managed by the utility and regulated by the California Public Utility Commission that allows solar customers to export solar power to the grid during the day and reduce their future electric bills by the amount of solar that they generate. For example, the amount that is produced and consumed is netted out, typically on an annual basis, and then the customers are only billed for their net energy use. Unfortunately, some utilities perceive net metering policies as lost revenue opportunities, so there's quite a bit of debate and struggle about how much credit solar owners should receive for the energy that they send to the grid. Next slide. Usually once a homeowner approaches an HOA board with a solar application, they've already gone through the process with their installer to determine how much solar they can fit on a roof or carport. These siting considerations are what a homeowner and their contractor consider before they can even make the decision to do a solar installation. These are the factors that HOA boards need to consider when determining what type of solar rules to create for their HOAs. For instance, siting considerations include how much electricity is being used on the properties, if there's shading of the roofs or where the systems are going to be located, the roof orientation, which determines how much sunlight the solar system will receive, the roof type and age, and if there's any obstructions. All of these siting considerations simply affect how big a solar system can be constructed. Next slide. And although this one looks like a physics lesson, it's important to understand the basic terminology used when talking about solar energy. For example, power and energy are often mistakenly used interchangeably. Power is the rate of energy that's produced or consumed. Energy is an amount of power used or produced over a given amount of time. When you hear the term kilowatt, that's a measurement of power. And when you hear the term kilowatt hour, that's a measurement of energy. So kilowatt hour is the total amount of electricity used over a set amount of time. In solar, we often talk about how much power a system produces. For example, the average size is about 5 to 8 kilowatts. In order to determine what this means as far as an impact on energy bills and the environment, we need to calculate how much power this generates over time. So when we say that a 5 kilowatt system is producing 20 kilowatt hours per day, this means the total electricity produced during the day is 20 kilowatt hours. And if it wasn't produced from solar, it would need to be produced from another source. For a comparison, it takes about burning about 17.3 pounds of coal to make 20 kilowatt hours of energy. Next slide. And here's a snapshot of what a typical home solar system looks like. The data was pulled from earlier this year. They're usually sized about on average to be 8 kilowatts. That'd be a standard size. They're sized to account for the majority of the electricity used on the property and not more than that. They're normally grid connected, which means it's connected to your utility lines, not always. They use net energy metering or NEM billing. That's the billing credit mechanism I mentioned. The average cost currently right now for solar is about $3.25 per watt. This means that an average size system of about 7 to 8 kilowatts would be about $25,000 to $26,000. And there's a number of financing options out there right now. It's in my 18 years of working in industry, I've seen financing come extremely far. You can now find financing which will enable you to put solar on your house and have a guaranteed monthly bill lower than your electric bill would otherwise be. And usually there's an option to purchase your system at the end of the financing term. Next slide. Next, we'll review the general market data needed to develop policies that meet the present needs of HOA communities and prepare for the future. So it's impossible to create HOA solar policies and rules without understanding the general solar market. The solar market is huge, an overwhelming majority of people want it, and it's growing very fast. For the last decade, solar has been growing at an average pace of about 33% each year, and it's anticipated to grow even faster over the next 5 years. A recent poll showed that 80% of Californians want rooftop solar. solar's current share of the national electricity mix is about 4.5, I actually think it's 4.6% at the moment, and that's up from just 0.1% in 2010. Nationwide, there's more than 130.9 gigawatts of solar installed, and that's enough to power about 23 million homes. And what this means as far as the workforce is also significant. And just in 2021, there were over 255,000 people working in solar at more than 10,000 companies in every US state. And the industry generated about $33 billion of private investment. HOA policies need to be designed to prepare for the solar industry's continued growth. They need to understand how fast it's growing and the demand is strong. The primary drivers for the current growth are similar to that in the past. People have always invested in solar to power homes and businesses, to meet environmental goals, and to save money on their electric bills. But these are becoming increasingly important with current climate events and power safety shutoffs. Also, since the cost of systems have been coming down so rapidly, that's also driven extremely quick or high demand. So the need to accommodate solar applications and rules are going to become an increasing priority for HOAs over the next 5 years. Next slide. So California has traditionally dominated the US solar market, but other states are continuing to expand rapidly. Still, just right at present, California is a leader in installed solar capacity nationwide. In 2021, states outside of California made up their largest share of the market in the last decade, and those were led by the rapid growth in Florida and Texas. Other states are catching up to California rapidly. But as you can see, California is by and far and away the leader. It has over 10 million properties with solar compared to Texas, which is the next largest one, which has just under 2 million. Some people predict Texas will surpass California someday. Last year, solar in Texas grew by about 23% compared to California's 14% growth rate. Next slide. And of course, the most importance to everyone here is at this presentation is California. It would be good to see some statistics for solar at HOAs in California, but I'm not aware of that data having been collected yet. Still, this is a good snapshot of the main statistics for solar in California. As I mentioned, over 10 million homes have solar. It's first in the nation. Its growth over the next 5 years, it's predicted to add another almost 25 megawatts. That means the solar market in California is predicted to almost double in size within the next 5 to 10 years. The current percentage of the state's electricity from solar is 26.21%. Prices have fallen 53% over the last 10 years. And there are almost 2,000 solar companies in the state. Those include manufacturers, installers, developers, and others. And the total investment in California is $80.8 billion. The next slide. So when compared to other technologies, solar is also the leader. This chart shows how solar stacks up against other technologies. As you can see, solar added the most new generating capacity to the grid in the past 3 consecutive years. It's on track to do so again in 2022. It also ranks first in new electric capacity additions in each of the last 9 years. And in 2021, 46% of all new electric capacity in the US was solar, the largest share in history. Solar's role in new generating capacity is expected to keep outpacing all other technologies in a similar manner over the next decade. Next slide. So these are just a couple industry predictions that are important for HOAs. The first being that the biggest area of cost decline opportunity in solar that is predicted is the decline in soft costs. And these are the costs for things other than the actual systems themselves, such as decreasing the amount of money it takes to permit, inspect, interconnect, and install the systems. These types of costs are very pertinent in HOA communities because depending on the policies an HOA has in place, the costs can be higher due to additional fees and hurdles imposed by an HOA. And for those like me who've worked in solar for the past few decades, we call it the solar coaster. It's a pretty self-explanatory term, but highlights the ups and downs we've been on in the last couple decades. The industry has always been driven by passionate, mission-driven individuals and struggled with a constant lack of long-term policies and incentives at basically all levels of government, from local to state to federal. Whether it is ever expiring or changing tax credits and rebates, NIM rates or new regulations, or simply differences in permitting rules from building department to building department and from state to state, the market has consistently rode out this roller coaster amidst an ever-growing list of heavily funded lobbyists trying to preserve the existing energy models. HOAs can be included in this roller coaster that solar is forced to navigate, but they also present an enormous potential opportunity to create stable policies in the future. Next slide. And so in order to get a perspective on how HOA communities fit into the overall solar market, it's important to understand the sheer size of HOA communities compared to communities without HOAs. For example, statewide, about 14.6 million people live in HOAs, and nationwide, 82.4% of all new homes sold in 2021 were part of HOAs. Looking at just California, if all 5.45 million homes in HOAs installed a relatively small solar system at about 5 kilowatts in size, this would be a daily average solar energy production collectively from those homes of about 1.09 gigawatt hours per day. To understand what this means for avoided fossil fuel use, it would take consuming over 178,000 barrels of oil, or burning about over 85 million pounds of coal to produce that same 1.09 gigawatt hours electricity. Or thinking of it in another way, it would take over 91,000 acres of US forests 1 year to sequester the equivalent amount of carbon. This is just for 1 day of the combined solar energy that could be produced by all the homes in California and HOA communities if they had solar. For a nationwide perspective, there are about 40 million units that are part of HOA communities. If the same small to average size 5 kilowatt system was installed on every one of those 40 million homes, they would collectively produce about 800 gigawatts per day on average. This is the equivalent amount of energy that would be produced by consuming over 1 million barrels of oil or burning over 627 million pounds of coal. And it would take over 670,000 acres of forests 1 year to sequester the equivalent amount of carbon. Needless to say, collectively, HOAs have an enormous opportunity to make a significant impact in achieving environmental goals. Next slide. Now that you know the basic terminology and market data for creating solar policies, I'll provide a basic overview of the California Solar Rights Act. This is a law that sets the rules for how HOAs can restrict solar and homeowner solar access rights. So a serious problem exists statewide among HOAs, and that's that they're simply not following the law. As a result, they aren't serving the needs of their homeowners and are exposing themselves to potential liability. The pressure on HOAs to process solar applications and have compliant solar rules in place will only increase as the market demand for solar continues to grow exponentially. So first, I'm going to review the law, and then I'll review how it is applied in a few real-life scenarios at HOAs. These sections of the California law listed here are known collectively as the California Solar Rights Act. About 25 other states have some type of solar rights access. Arizona, California, Florida, Massachusetts, and New York all have similar versions of the Solar Rights Act here. California's Solar Rights Act was adopted for environmental reasons and to protect the affordability of going solar. Through the act, the legislature sought to balance the needs of individual solar energy system owners with other property owners by developing solar access rights. The act is a set of rules designed with the goal of protecting the right to install and operate solar energy technology on a home or business, including access to sunlight. The act applies to both public and private entities. For example, the act has provisions restricting actions that can be taken by local governments, and those restricting actions that private entities like HOAs can include in their CC&Rs that are enforced by HOA boards. Consumers of solar, government bodies, and HOAs all often misunderstand the provisions and applications of these laws. So the goal here is just to remove some of that confusion. Next. So although my focus in this presentation is on the ways the Act applies in HOAs, I'm first going to provide a brief overview of all the solar access rights included in the law. It's helpful to understand how all the provisions of the Act work together to provide a combined solar access right for homeowners. First, the Act prohibits CC&Rs like those enforced by HOAs, which would unreasonably restrict the use or installation of solar energy systems. The Act also establishes the legal right to a solar easement, which protects access to sunlight across adjacent properties. And it also describes the minimum requirements needed to create a solar easement. The Act defines which solar energy systems are covered by its provisions. And with respect to limits on local governmental restrictions on solar installations, the Act discourages local governments from adopting an ordinance that would unreasonably restrict the use of solar energy systems. It also requires local governments to use a non-discretionary permitting process for solar and to create an expedited streamlined permitting process for small rooftop systems. Additionally, the Act requires local governments that are seeking state-sponsored incentives for solar to demonstrate compliance with certain provisions of the Act. The Act also contains provisions that protect passive solar opportunities in subdivisions. Specifically, the Act requires certain subdivisions to provide for future passive and natural heating and cooling opportunities to the extent feasible. And last, the Act allows cities and counties to require by ordinance the dedication of solar easements in certain subdivisions as a condition of a tentative map approval. Next slide. So with respect to the Act's limits on an HOA's ability to restrict solar installations, the Act specifies how CC&Rs can be written and enforced with respect to solar access rights in their communities. HOAs are governed by CC&Rs and managed and enforced by HOA boards. Boards have some discretionary authority, but they must follow their CC&Rs, bylaws, and California laws, including the Solar Rights Act. The Act prohibits any provision in an HOA's governing documents or by action of the board from effectively prohibiting or restricting the installation or use of a solar energy system in separately owned and common areas. What are allowed is for the governing documents and boards to impose reasonable restrictions on homeowners' applications to install solar energy systems in the developments. Next slide. Now, as a preliminary matter, it's important to note what type of solar energy systems are protected by the Act. In order to be clear about what type of solar access rights the Act protects, the Act defines what solar energy systems are covered. It should be noted that this definition is very broad. Under the Act, a solar energy system means either of the following: any solar collector or other solar energy device whose primary purpose is to provide for the collection, storage, and distribution of solar energy for space heating, space cooling, electric generation, or water heating, or any structural design feature of a building whose primary purpose is to provide for the collection, storage, and distribution of solar energy for electricity generation, space heating or cooling, or for water heating. Thus, any homeowner application to install a type of solar energy system as defined here will be subject to the restrictions of the Act in an HOA community. Next slide. The next section of the Act to understand are the definitions of reasonable and significantly. Arguably, these are perhaps the most important aspects of the law. And that is because these definitions determine what type of HOA restrictions can be imposed on a homeowner's solar application. Pursuant to the Act, reasonable restrictions are those that do not significantly increase the cost of the system or significantly decrease its efficiency or specified performance, or that allow for alternative systems of comparable cost, efficiency, and energy conservation benefits. The term significantly within that definition has different meanings depending on the type of solar energy system being used. For instance, for PV systems, the term significantly means an amount not to exceed $1,000 over the system's cost as originally proposed, or a decrease in the system's efficiency of an amount not exceeding 10% as originally proposed. For solar water heating systems or solar swimming pool heating systems, it's a similar definition, but adds a cap. It says that significantly means an amount exceeding 10% of the cost of the system, but in no case more than $1,000, or decreasing the efficiency of the system by an amount exceeding 10% as proposed. To be clear, any HOA restriction imposed on a solar application would not be considered reasonable and thus would not be allowed under the Act if the restriction resulted in significantly increasing the cost of the system by this $1,000 threshold, or decreasing the efficiency of the system by more than 10% as proposed. Simply put, restrictions that have these significant impacts are not considered reasonable. Next slide. Due to the nature of HOA property ownership and the strong desire of the legislature to protect solar access rights, in 2017, a further set of rules was adopted that amended the Act to specify solar access rights when homeowners want to install solar in common areas of their developments. It's easiest to understand the rules that apply to common areas when breaking them out into categories of what an HOA can do, what they must do, and what they have the option of doing with respect, what they cannot do, what they must do, and what they have the option of doing with respect to these areas of the communities. HOAs cannot adopt policies prohibiting solar installations in common areas. They cannot require a 67% membership vote on a request to install solar in common areas as long as they meet certain criteria. They cannot prohibit requests by owners to install solar on garages and carports over which the owner has exclusive use. The HOAs must notify each owner of a building on which an installation will be located, and they must require the owner and all successive owners to maintain homeowner insurance at all times and provide proof of that within 14 days of the system's approval. Next slide. So for multifamily common area roofs, HOAs can restrict homeowners to an equitable allocation of the common area of roofs, which limits the usable roof space, but they must allow requests to install solar on the roof above the building in which the homeowner resides, subject to fire code setbacks and within their equitable allocation. The Act also gives an HOA several optional restrictions that it can impose. And these are with respect to solar site surveys. The HOA can require that the applicant submit a solar site survey that shows the placement of the system, and it must be prepared by their licensed contractor, and it must include the usable space that's part of the application, and also determination of an equitable allocation of the usable solar roof area among all owners sharing that same roof, garage, or carport. As another optional restriction, HOAs can require owners of the systems to be responsible for basically any and all costs, damage, maintenance, and repairs due to the solar system's installation, and they can require the owners disclose these obligations to all successive owners of the system. Next slide. So in sum, the Act is very specific about what an HOA can and cannot do in their solar rules. And it provides for multiple optional restrictions that can be imposed on solar installations. HOAs can impose reasonable restrictions on the installation of solar energy systems and limit requests to install solar to an equitable area of the common roof, but they must allow installations over garages and carports over which the owner has exclusive use. They can require the owner of a separate interest to obtain the approval from the HOA for the installation of a system in a separate interest owned by another. They can impose reasonable restrictions on the owner for the maintenance, repair, or replacement of roofs or other building components affected by the solar. And they can require installers of the systems to indemnify, reimburse the HOA and its members for any loss or damage caused by the system. And this means that the HOA boards can consider aesthetics when reviewing solar applications and creating their solar rules, but any restriction placed on the applications must comply with the rule regarding not significantly increasing the system's cost or decreasing its efficiency as required by the Act. HOA boards need to understand the requirements when receiving a solar application and what can happen if they fail to follow the process correctly. HOA boards must process the application by a homeowner to install solar in the same manner as that for an architectural modification, and they shall not willfully avoid or delay the denial or approval. The approval or denial must be in writing, and if it's not denied within 45 days from receipt, the application is deemed approved unless due to a reasonable request by the HOA board for additional information. For any violations of the act, HOA board is actually liable for actual damages suffered by the homeowner, a penalty up to $1,000, and reimbursement of a homeowner's attorney fees. It just as a note, in reviewing homeowner requests and HOA board actions with respect to solar, I've seen countless violations of the law, misunderstandings about the law, and a hodgepodge of rules, misunderstandings about the basics of solar, and a potential for liability. So this is definitely something to pay attention to and figure out a good solution for. Next slide. In regard to EV chargers, there's a very similar set of laws to the solar access rights I just discussed. And these rules will become increasingly important given that this sale of new gas cars in California is going to be prohibited starting in 2035. In the following slides, I provided a summary of these laws for you to review, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to walk you through them today. They'll be available for you after this presentation through Echo, I believe. And the only thing to note that's different is with EV chargers, the HOA has 60 days to reply to a homeowner's application to install an EV charger versus that 45-day deadline for solar. So if we want to just skip that next slide and the following slide and go to the examples, great. So now that we've reviewed the basic issues needed to set solar policies and the legal framework required, I'm going to review some real examples of different things that I've seen HOAs do, and then I'll discuss what's permissible and not permissible under the law. So I hear from homeowners and HOAs all the time who are struggling with their HOA boards. I'll now go through a series of common violations and issues that I've seen. It's important to remember that the law is not always black and white on these types of issues. Often the answers as to whether a restriction is legal or illegal might be a gray area and ultimately a policy decision to be made by the HOA board. HOA boards have to think through what is reasonable and determine when they want to impose the optional restrictions provided for in the act. For instance, if an HOA board simply asks a law firm to develop solar rules for them compliant with the act, they're likely not to get a good result. They need to provide clear direction that the goal is to promote solar or not, and then they need to receive guidance on the optional restrictions. So this first example, an HOA policy that declines all applications to install solar and EV chargers. Hopefully that one's clear at this point. Absolutely illegal. Number two, telling homeowners that the HOA board cannot process their solar application by the 45-day deadline because the HOA board does not have rules in place to approve or deny solar application requests. Not allowed. Pursuant to the act, the HOA must approve or deny the application within 45 days. If it's not denied, then the only reason a solar application will not be deemed automatically approved within that 45-day window is if it's due to a reasonable request by the board for additional information. The response that you just don't have rules in place doesn't satisfy that. Number three, claims by an HOA that homeowners cannot get solar because their roofs or carports are not strong enough. If untrue, illegal, and very likely unlikely to be true, or it would indicate a larger issue with the integrity of the homes and carport structures at the HOA. As I mentioned, solar is not heavy and it is not a bomb. Number four, restrictions that make homeowners take over the full maintenance and replacement of the entire roof where the solar is installed. Probably illegal, but also a little gray. All the rules need to be reasonable. So if something like this is too broadly written, it likely would not be held up in court. Specifically, the HOA can impose reasonable restrictions on a solar owner for the maintenance, repair, or replacement of roofs or other building components. Arguably, this would be limited to the roof penetrations and any wear and tear due to walking on the roof, solely related to the solar installation. A restriction like this should be narrowly written to not place a burden on the owner to have to take over full maintenance and repair of the entire roof. Next slide. Number 5, imposing a requirement that the homeowner pay for the HOA's legal fees in drafting indemnification, repair, and other agreements to enforce the HOA's solar rules. And as I mentioned, every one of these are things I've seen. This is not provided for in the act. It's unclear whether this would hold up in court. This could be a large additional cost imposed on the homeowner, especially with no reasonable parameter like a fee cap or visibility on what the cost could be. Without such reasonable parameters, and given this likely increases the cost by more than 1,000, I think it would be illegal, but it has not been tested in court. Number 6, imposing obligations on a homeowner to pay for the HOA to retain its own consultant to review all information and documents provided by the owner in connection with its solar application. If this was required for other types of architectural reviews, it may be permissible, but again, there must be a reasonable cap on fees, notice, standard homeowner protections, and if the requirement is not imposed on other types of architectural modifications and the costs are above $1,000, it likely would not be allowed as well. Number 7, requiring short installation periods and imposing other installation restrictions on homeowner applications. All installation restrictions must be reasonable and not violate the $1,000 10% efficiency requirement. If the restrictions don't conform with solar industry standard installation timelines and procedures, they would likely be considered unreasonable as well. Also, it should be noted that solar arguably needs some special consideration, given that the installation timelines can vary based on permitting delays, utility and interconnection requirements, supply constraints, and force majeure events. Next slide. Number 8, require homeowners to sign a maintenance, repair, and indemnification agreement. This is permissible, but it's an optional, not mandatory restriction that can be imposed. And alternatively, an HOA can require that the solar contractor agree to this type of indemnification, and the contents of the agreement should be reasonable. Number 9, imposing a requirement that the homeowner hire a structural professional engineer to stamp or approve the system plans. Potentially illegal, hasn't been tested, but also potentially optional. A structural engineering analysis can be, but is not always required when installing solar. The trend nationwide is towards streamlining permitting, and there's quite a lot of effort underway to this effect. Many building departments use the over-the-counter permitting for systems without requiring this type of stamp. And if the permitting department does not require a structural engineer to stamp the design, and the requirement increases the cost to go solar by over $1,000, it would likely not be allowed. Number 10, requiring that an HOA has the right to inspect the system at any time, and the homeowner must reimburse the HOA for the cost of the inspection. I would say most likely not allowed. This would allow the HOA to perform virtually unlimited inspections of the system and then charge the cost of such inspections to the homeowners. This restriction would likely be found unreasonable and arbitrary. Again, not tested though. Number 11, developing solar rules that, when taken as a whole, arguably result in a policy that exceeds any other architectural modification request and results in effectively prohibiting all solar by merely kind of the impracticality of any owner being willing to sign up for it. I would say illegal and definitely violates the spirit and intent of the California Solar Rights Act. Number 12, restrictions that require homeowners to pay for the HOA's cost to have its own consultant to do a solar site survey. This one is not allowed. What is allowed is that HOAs can require the homeowner to provide the HOA with the site survey prepared by the homeowner's own contractor. So, and it's also an optional restriction. It's not allowed that the homeowner has to pay the HOA's cost to have its own consultant. The last one here, 13, requirements that homeowners purchase a certain threshold amount of homeowner liability insurance. The requirement of demonstrating proof of a homeowner's insurance liability is correct. It must be demonstrated for common area roofs. However, the act doesn't set a threshold for how much the policy limit should be. And at some point, if it doesn't align with the HOA's architectural guidelines, it would probably be considered unreasonably high and not allowed. And just a few optional policy ideas that I didn't include on the slide, but are important to discuss. There is the potential for HOAs to install a solar system or electric vehicle charging station in the common area for use of all members of the association. And then in that case, the association must develop appropriate terms of use for receiving electricity from the system or using the charging station. This is actually an elegant solution to providing solar, and it's not available outside of HOA communities. The law is currently written in California is that anytime solar is provided to more than 3 contiguous parcels, not under common ownership, then that solar system and the owner are considered a regulated utility, and that essentially makes the mechanics and costs of going solar impossible. HOAs are in the unique position of being able to go through the applicable process to create common areas, use existing ones, and then sell energy from systems or provide common use in their developments. One last creative idea is with respect to EV chargers is that an association can create a new parking space where one didn't exist to facilitate the installation of a EV charging station. Next slide. I hope I've impressed on you what an important role HOAs play in solar policies and rights. This is not a small issue, and we're seeing violations, which mean potential HOA liability and the lack of people to go solar on a consistent basis. So I'm going to wrap up the presentation with a few suggested solutions on what HOAs can do. Last slide. In order to address the strong desire of owners to access solar and EV chargers and the frequent problems of HOAs simply not following solar access rules, HOA communities should be proactive, as was mentioned in the prior presentation, of assessing their community's desire to support or not support solar and implementing proper solar policies and rules before solar and EV charger applications are made. Also, in some cases, HOA boards might want to revise their existing solar rules and policies to make them more representative of their community's stance and the future of the solar and EV charger market. HOAs that don't take these steps aren't serving their communities, but they're also exposing themselves to liability. We've been working on a standardized set of solar documents for HOAs. These can be customized for HOAs depending on their solar and EV charger stances within the limits of the law. When deciding on solar rules, HOAs should consider the impact on individual homeowners' immediate decision to go solar, their added value to the community, climate goals, and the increased real property value provided by solar. And as you can see, many sections of the Solar Rights Act are subject to interpretations, and HOAs have the option to impose restrictions with a heavy or light hand. If an HOA is having an attorney draft their rules, it's very important that they specify whether they want just the minimum requirements imposed or the maximum restrictions possible imposed. And they should ask the attorneys to highlight all discretionary optional restrictions. You can't just simply send a request to a law firm to draft solar rules. You need to decide on your community's position on solar and then provide clear direction to the attorneys. Collectively, HOAs have an enormous opportunity to contribute to meeting our climate goals and basic energy security of residents. HOAs should work together to create a plan like this wonderful educational seminar, create partners, create standardized solar rules, and meet the growing need. With great power comes great responsibility. That's the end of my presentation. Here's my contact info. Please feel free to call or email me with follow-up questions beyond the time that we have for this Q&A. And I would just like to also add that there is an entire karaoke band practicing outside of my office window right now. So hopefully you didn't listen to that the entire presentation.
No, I couldn't hear it at all. Maybe somebody else
Oh
could.
my gosh.
How fun that would be though. Okay, on a Saturday. So
I've been trying my best.
thank you, Angela. That was wonderful. And we have a number of questions, 40 questions in the box now. And what I'd like to do is point to or ask our participants to go to the Q&A, ask your questions, and also do the upvote. We will take the top upvote. And while you're doing that, I'm gonna add a little bit to the presentation since I actually helped write that 2017 law and was part of the discussion. My contribution was on the equitable use of solar area, if you will, on the rooftops. We ran into a little bit of a wording issue because it was equal use of the rooftop. But when you have 4 stories in a condo, it makes it really difficult if people adopt and want to do a project at different times. And we also had a larger community on the peninsula of San Francisco that was looking at doing a microgrid for the entire community. And they started getting people that wanted to put their own solar panels up, and it was going to mess up the whole scheme for the project wide, the HOA wide things, the HOA wide project. So equitable means it's got to be available in a reasonable term to everyone, opposed to equal, which is divided in a mathematical formula. And so if an individual has a desire to do it, and there's no policy in place by the HOA, then you got to go with the individual and adopt it. That's the way the law reads. And you can't dilly-dally around. If there's a reasonable process that's underway and the community is looking at doing either a microgrid or to put their plan together on a community-wide basis, that has a higher status in the law. The way it was written, the way it was interpreted, and actually was the way I interpreted and wrote it, is so that the community, you could do a community project, and that would have precedence over an individual project as long as it's done in a reasonable manner and a reasonable time frame. So that was just a little bit of a side point there. And I also want to do a shout out to our friends at Rossmore. Their environmental committee was the one that pushed that law forward, and was the group that we were negotiating with at the time. So thank you for that.
I just want to add something to that because I tried to mention it, and I think it's just absolutely so important, because there are so many groups of homeowners not in common interest developments, not in HOAs, that want to have like a solar system that serves all their needs. And right now, the way the law is written, they can't do that. So HOAs have a really unique ability to create these sort of large systems and serve all the needs of their homeowners without becoming a regulated utility. And it's something that people outside of the HOA world are trying to figure out. So it's a really amazing opportunity that should be, pursued.
Well, and that was the thought behind the language in that bill is let's talk to the HOA communities and try to get them to put in place, number one, a policy so that you can do this. It's a tsunami. It's going to happen. And so deal with it. Put a policy in, maybe you can do it on a community-wide basis and cut your costs down, and also have a reliable energy source in times of disaster, like the wildfires or otherwise. So it's a good idea to get ahead of the game and get your policy in place as an HOA board. But if you want to move forward as an individual, it's a good idea. I mean, you can do that now, and I think that's also an appropriate way to go. So let's go ahead and get to some of these questions, because we have a lot. We'll go to 11 o'clock here, Angela, and any of the panelists may, of course, respond as well. I'm going to go to the most upvotes here and take it from the top. 14 by Karen B. What grants are available to HOAs to install solar or EV charging stations? And I know Bill's going to touch on a couple of them, but go ahead and anyone can answer that, I think, on the panel.
I didn't actually hear the question, but I don't think it was for me.
It was what grants are available to HOAs to install solar or EV charging station?
Ooh, that's not something that
there are a lot of them.
Well, I'll chime in that there is it's called BayREN, and they do have grants available, but not odd to believe it's not solar. If you could install something that reduces your energy use, then there are grants available. But if you want to install solar panels, then there are no grants available through BayREN.
Yeah, and I think if you talk to your utilities, that's probably the smartest thing. Start with your utilities, ask them what programs and plans they have available. They probably know what's going on at the state level and the national level, because often some of these programs come from the federal level and they're delegated to the state authorities. and then the states usually give them to either their energy commission or to the utility to dole out to the specific projects, and there are usually terms and requirements on those projects. I've seen a lot of those out there. I'm sure that our folks from Oakmont must have had it, looked at some of the grants. Did you see anything out there, Sue? Is there no grants? Okay, well, there you go. There are programs. You gotta ferret them out.
Well, I was just going to say, our county was a source of least of information that was actually might have included some sourcing, some funding, and that was going on at the same time. So.
Yeah, and it's important to, you can go online and look for some of the renewable energy groups out there and talk to them, because there are tens, if you will. There's probably 20 or 30 different groups out there that deal in this and are promoting it. So there are good resources out there.
Just as I mentioned earlier in my presentation too, there's also quite an array of, loans and third-party financing structures, which really, you can almost get up and running, saving money almost immediately through them, because you're not paying otherwise a huge electric bill. And so it's really, I feel like the third-party financing for renewables is part of what has contributed to the explosive growth in the industry over the last couple decades. So it's definitely worth also kind of running those numbers and looking into those options.
Yeah, and I will say that I have tried reaching out to some of the nonprofits in this space and some of the utilities and asked them to do something specifically for HOAs. So we're kind of advocating for that. I've gotten nowhere on that, but it really is something that should have a little bit more notoriety, and somebody should come in with an HOA program. It's, I think, a missed opportunity for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we go. Jeremy is asking, for common roofs where a homeowner has solar panels, but the HOA is responsible for the roof replacement on a regular schedule, how is the extra cost of replacing a roof with solar distributed? And I mean, that's like equitable distribution, or I'm not sure. Does the homeowner pay whatever costs are above the normal cost of the roof replacement? So they have a panel on there and they have to replace it. Now they're going to charge them a little more money because they have to remove the panel and put it back. Who pays for that extra cost?
I think it's, it can be negotiated, but I think primarily the homeowner is going to pay. Installers do that all the time. They come in, they remove the solar panels, the roof's redone, and then the installers put the systems back.
So in essence, you're going to have a quote for the roof without the solar, and then you go and you say, okay, how much is it now that the solar's there? And is that?
I do think you should check about leasing, because I understand that's one of the advantages. I certainly don't have those facts, but I'm told that if you are leasing, the lease company promises to take it off and put it back and maintain it, etc. So that would be,
yeah.
Yeah, that's probably a good point too.
And you also have to remember, I mean, okay, that's a cost in the future, but overall you're saving money by avoided electric bills. So, you could, if you're not leasing,
it does create a little more management challenge for the HOA because there will be, and for the homeowner. If the homeowner's not thinking that they're going to have to pay for that at some point down the road, then they need to make sure they have enough savings to cover the cost, the additional cost. And again, there's a reasonableness standard that has to be applied here too. So if it needs to be a reasonable amount of money for the extra work that's being done, not, it's $1,000 for the roof and $10,000 for the solar part. That wouldn't fly. Okay, so you believe that's kind of stuff that happens once in a while. So so let's go to Dana Hall with 10 upvotes here. Let's see, Dana, you flew away. Okay, what about installing solar panels on a common area roof maintained by the HOA? Who pays for that cost? Then I think we answered that, right?
I think we answered that.
So yeah, so it frankly depends on the agreement you have with the homeowner, but generally speaking, it's going to be the HOA unless there's something in the agreement for a certain maintenance charge or fee, and that has to be reasonable. Jay Arnold with 9 upvotes. Is there a legal or ethical funding process for costs over the grants when there are regarding 3 to 5 EV owners, when you have several owners, I guess, out of a building of 50 to 60 condos. The current plan is to levy assessments for all units. So how do you do the equitable distribution of those costs? Angela, any thoughts on what should be done?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question. Can you say that
Well,
again?
if there's a, you have 3 or 5, say you have 5 EV people in the community that has the same roof, and there's 50 to 60 condos in there. How do you spread the cost of those and the benefits to the grant available to the entire community, opposed to just 5 of them that are doing the project?
I'm gonna have to say I'd have to see that and think about that offline. I'm not ready to
Yeah, that's fine.
pipe in on that one.
It's a complicated question. So the question of equity it always adds a little different component, but it's a good question. This is anonymous attendee. Can solar panels leak? Where did you go? Can solar panels leak or cause water damage to an upstairs condo unit? And isn't that unfair to the unit owner when that panel isn't even theirs? For instance, it belongs to the downstairs unit, and so they put a panel in, it breaches the exterior element, the roof, and it leaks to the top floor, and the person who put the panel in is on the bottom floor, so all the damage is going to the unit.
I tried to mention that is because you hear concerns about that a lot, and in my experience, but will it be a leak at the roof penetration? It almost never happens in reality. If you think about the other things that are attached to roof, satellites and so forth, like they know what they're doing as long as you use a reputable contractor. So, I mean, you could worry about everything, but it's really just unlikely to happen.
Yeah, so let me add that I'm not an attorney, but I will give you some advice or some thoughts. It boils down to what your agreement is, and you should always have an agreement with the homeowner, whatever that agreement is, and the installation of the whatever's causing the leak. You need to go and find out what caused the leak, because who knows what the circumstances are for the leak. So you would have to go in, check the leak, see who's responsible for the leak, and then it normally goes through your normal water damage process in this. Now, you should write into the contract that if it's due to the solar panel installation, whoever is responsible for that installation should be the ones that are required to be are the responsible parties for any leak damage. That just makes sense, but you do have to pay attention to that. Let's see, Chad with 11 upvotes here. Can an HOA install a main power sub panel and then have each parking spot owner pay for the installation of their own EV connection from that main power supply? And how might the HOA charge for the electrical use of each of the each individual EV and submetering? So that's kind of a question. Do you see the question there, Chad? You might.
Yeah, I can help answer the second portion of that question.
Yeah.
So typically, HOAs will look to their utility bill, and then the HOAs can implement a policy on the stations for each individual driver account to be charged per kilowatt that they're using. So essentially, they're being charged for the electricity that they're using. But oftentimes the products that I work on, HOAs will charge more just because of the value EV charging stations are in the multifamily space. It's a value added amenity to not have to rely on public facing fast charging and to have that convenience to charge in your own home. So oftentimes, they'll charge 30-40 cents a kilowatt hour and actually collect a little more profit on their utility bill that they're receiving on a month-by-month basis. So,
okay, sounds good. So Valerie asks, and we have a few more minutes here. Let me go up here. Valerie asks, there are 10 upvotes here. If the HOA decides to install a few EV chargers at the HOA expense, can they allow the general public to use the EV chargers in order to generate extra income for the HOA?
Certainly, yeah, they certainly can. They can, I even see HOAs, offer charging that's public facing just on the weekends. So you can do a hybrid approach. You can do completely private, or you can do public facing. So that's all up to the HOA on what they want to do.
Yeah, you're going to need to be really careful about that because an HOA is a nonprofit and it's not. You talk to your accountant, make sure, or your attorney, and make sure that that's all legit, because it's a nonprofit and you don't want to jeopardize your nonprofit status if you're making a profit. So that's when you open it up to the public, that becomes a bit of a problem. The same with your common areas, your amenities. Bill, you might want to say something more about that.
Yeah, it has not nonprofit. That's irrelevant. Sorry, Dave. It doesn't. If we're speaking about it, it's from a tax standpoint. The income from the non-members, if they're going to go in the electricity business, is taxable less any directly related expenses. So that's something you have to work out annually. But as far as the nonprofit status, homeowner association, this is off topic slightly, are not nonprofits in the eyes of the taxing authorities. So,
right. Right. Okay, so here you go. Next one is from an anonymous attendee. There are reports of EVs catching on fire while charging, and it's very difficult for the fire department to put out the fires on EV batteries. EV owners have lost their homes to these fires. If EV is charging in a carport embedded within a multifamily building, the fire would destroy the entire building. Can charging stations be restricted to parking areas opposed to the buildings themselves? And that's I hear this a lot. I don't know that I've seen much of this. There's some older cases and where some batteries did have some problems, but I think Bert spoke to this a little bit about the improvements in the systems. But Dean, maybe you can talk about EV.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen a couple articles regarding some of the residential stations that, the unfortunate situations that have happened there. In terms to the installation of the commercial stations, it's really up to, the HOA and the electrician in terms of where it's going to be the most economically reasonable place to allocate the stations, if that's going to be in an undercovered area, or if they're more comfortable doing it in an area in the open parking lot. But I personally have not seen any commercial stations catch fire. I think those stations are more of the residential ones, unfortunately. But like you mentioned, we are working to continue to improve the technology within the station and prevent these kind of one-off situations from happening in the future. But yeah, it's a good question.
It's a really good question. And I'd also, Kevin Boland's on the call too, and he does insurance. It would also be a good idea to run it by your insurance carrier as well to make sure you don't have any issues down the road here. So anyway, let's move to should installation, again, anonymous, should installation of solar panels be scheduled with roof replacement work to coordinate the work at the same area? That's a practical question. I see, Sue, you have an opinion?
Well, it just makes sense. If you're going to, for instance, I've been told my roof would need to be, they would not install it, but let's just say they said, sure, we'll go ahead and install it, but there's less than 5 years on the roof. That would make no sense. You'd want to take care of the roof.
At the same time.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. What is involved with regards to replacing a roof covered with solar panels? How difficult is it to replace the solar panels? Pretty easy, isn't it?
It's pretty easy. Yep.
Yeah, it's got to be. I think that's it's not an issue. You just got to make sure that any of the holes that are there are covered up. That's normally part of the process. Okay. There's a huge difference between solar panels on HOA single family homes, townhomes, and condos. Do the laws differentiate that? And Angela, maybe you can deal with that? Is there a difference between a single family and a multi-family home?
Single family and a only to the extent that you're talking about a common area roof space, a multifamily common area roof space, and then that's where you have the equitable allocation of, space by family. But, and so there's some different rules around that, but there's,
Yeah.
both sets of homeowners have right to go solar in those situations.
Yeah, so there is a difference. Obviously, if you own your roof, you can do just about as much as you want. And then it becomes an aesthetic standard for the HOA. So it's a matter of, you got to go to your committee on the aesthetics in the community.
Yeah, then that's where like they can't impose a restriction that increases the cost by more than $1,000 or decreases the efficiency by more than 10% as presented.
Right, and then if it's a multifamily unit, then you have the other issue, which is, okay, how do you equitably do this? And that's a good question too. There can be problems for HOA boards for both in terms of the access to the sunlight and the efficiency of the solar panels. And so a neighbor may have a very tall tree and you say, hey, I put solar panels up, now the tree's grown up to, it was 100% efficient or 90% efficient, and now the tree's up there and it's only 25% efficient, cut your tree down. So you're going to run into those kind of things, and you need to think through those over time in your policies, make sure those are clear, even for a single family dwelling. And for a multifamily unit, you're going to have the issue of, you have a lot of people in those units, and you're going to have changes. Once you change your unit, the guy that buys your unit is responsible for that solar panel as well, if you sell your unit, and there's a lot more complexities there. And then the third thing is the common areas, and everybody owns the common area, so you have to have that be done by the entire community. And those common areas, that's where you look for your common solutions, and that's a really good opportunity there. You did mention, Angela, exclusive use and the ability to put solar panels on exclusive use. That's another kind of subset of common area. And in that, I believe, from what I learned today, is you have to allow that.
Yep,
So.
absolutely correct.
Okay, so there you go. Were we on time? Okay, we have enough for one more question. This will be the last one. Did you say that that if we convert a parking space for EV, can we charge the individual for charging their car? Can you actually charge them if you do that?
Yes, certainly. I'm hoping all these questions will be addressed as well in my presentation coming up here. But certainly can. So
yeah, and so Dean's going to talk in just a couple minutes. I want to say thank you to Angela for coming today. We very much appreciate it. Excellent presentation, lots of information. Remember, everybody, we're going to be sending these slides out to you, so you'll be able to read through them for your personal use. You can share them probably with your HOA boards, but and let's go solar. So thank you, Angela. We appreciate your time here. And I also want to say thanks to our Q&A session sponsors, Heritage Bank of Commerce, Silver Creek Association Management, Farmers Insurance, the Kevin Boland Insurance Company, CID Consortium, and the Levy, Erlinger and Company, LLP CPAs. So thank you so much. Angela, thank you for coming today.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Nice to-
Bye-bye. Okay, and now we're going to move on to our next general session presentation, which will include Dean Seiss, and we're going to have Bill Erlinger speak a little bit right after Dean. So Dean, why don't you go ahead with your program?
yeah, hey, thanks, David. Yeah, similar to Angela's presentation, hoping that after this we can kind of agree that multifamily EV charging is easy, and answer any of those questions in the chat following the presentation. For any site-specific questions, I'd love to answer them offline and just kind of dive into the scope of work a little bit more. But for the sake of time, happy to address like anything on a high level. So happy to jump right into it.
Go ahead.
So for the agenda today, we're going to discuss the benefits of EV charging stations. One is a renter and as a property owner. We're going to be discussing planning an EV charging station project, steps you can take, and incentives and potential tax credits you can leverage to help subsidize your project. We're going to discuss two of the most common operating models for EV charging station projects, and then some additional action steps you can take moving forward. Before we jump into the benefits, I wanted to just discuss some statistics behind the mass adoption of electric vehicles and this forecast here for where we're going to be going. So below is the latest forecast for new EV sales through 2030. As you can see here, that EV sales are projected to grow to right around 29.5% of all new car sales by 2030. Currently, the sales for EVs are right around 800,000 in 2022, and they're projected to get to this 29.5%. We're going to be right around 4.7 billion in sales. We did hit a 5% threshold this year, which is huge news. So EV car sales hit that 5%, and we are at that 5% with Europe and China. We're at right around 160% year-over-year growth for EV sales. So those are just some statistics from this year and kind of a forecast showing where the industry is headed over the next decade. Diving into the resident EV charging benefits, I'm an EV driver myself. I drive a Nissan Leaf, and I do live in a multifamily property without EV charging. And I'd be lying if I said it was not very difficult. Some of the benefits for a resident include easing range anxiety, which is a huge thing for EV drivers. No longer having to rely on public facing fast charging. When you have charging at home, you simply just plug it in, you go to bed and your car is fully charged. You got a full battery. It's similar to, an electric toothbrush. When you put it on the charger at night, you're not worried about it not being charged in the morning. So it's definitely, it provides peace of mind. Like I mentioned here, it provides convenience and flexibility. It's oftentimes cheaper, more predictable, and then it presents, an opportunity for residents to go out and purchase or lease an electric vehicle. Diving into the property owner benefits. As you can see here, this visual on the right, I put it there to kind of show the benefits of how it increases your property value beyond just adding the EV supply equipment to your property and having that presence there. You're definitely getting an increased competitive offering by having it. Many sites such as Zillow, apartments.com are now allowing you to filter by apartments with EV charging stations. So you're getting that competitive edge to attract more residents to your property. You're getting that resident satisfaction, and you're getting an increase in lease renewals. EV charging stations today are really becoming more of a necessity rather than an amenity in the multifamily space. So definitely a lot of HOA members and property owners that I work with are doing everything they can to get these stations in the ground. Monitor and optimize energy usage. So when we talk about energy usage, oftentimes I discuss the load management features and energy management features that are integrated into the software of these stations. So load management works to balance energy consumption and helps you save money during peak utility times. So you're able to set station load limits in terms of you're able to control where electricity is used, where it goes, and how much is going into each vehicle. So you're able to monitor those peak utility times and set those station load limits as the property owner and as the HOA to kind of manage those off-peak times. As a property owner, you're also able to leverage incentives and oftentimes tax benefits to help get in at a lower cost. And then most importantly, you're able to be a leader for a greener community and do your part to reduce your carbon footprint. All right, ready to jump into the next slide. All right, offsetting costs, utility, or utilizing subsidies, and navigating applications. So the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act has retroactively allowed 30% up to $30,000 of overall project costs to be incentivized by a tax credit. That Inflation Reduction Act recently got signed and updated and will be changing starting January 1st, 2023. The credit is reduced to 6%, and there is labor limitations and geographic limitations in terms of where those tax benefits are going to be able to be allocated. I linked the alternate fuels data center website in the chat. That is what I use for all the products that I work on to find, local grants or incentives available from the utility and at the state level. So definitely a great resource there. It provides a map of the United States. You can just simply click on the state and you get to see a drop down of all the grants and utility providers and what subsidies may be available to you. To kind of reiterate what David was mentioning, it is really best to leverage your local utility and getting on a list for updates. And then that last bullet there is working with the trusted EV charging vendor. So the vendor will help you identify what's available to you, and they can help guide you through those applications and grants to leverage the free money that's out there for EV charging infrastructure. Some of the common programs in California, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, just because these programs are often changing as many people are looking to take advantage of the money. The California Energy Commission still has right around $8 to $9 million left in funding. Southern California Edison is the biggest program in the United States, and they do still have funding available. As of right now, their program has gone to a wait list. So essentially, they would submit to SCE, and then they would hold your application in line in a wait list, review your site, and then notify you if you'd be approved to move forward. Other common programs include LADWP, SDG&E, and then SMUD, which is an open program. All these programs have certain requirements, network requirements, hard approved manufacturers and hardware. So like I mentioned, it can get very overwhelming, but that's why selecting a trusted charging vendor is very important, because they're going to help guide you through these programs and check all the boxes you need to make this project happen. Getting into dedicated versus shared EV charging. So when you look at the multifamily space, a lot of sites, they have deeded parking. They have reserved parking for drivers. And then some sites, they have shared parking. I wanted to just put this slide on here to kind of break it down on how it works and what may be the right fit for you attendees as the HOA. Looking at personal charging. Personal charging is a more costly option for tenants to install and charge in their reserved space. How it works is you would have one driver account linked to that station, and that monthly service for the networking and the hardware or the installation would be paid by that individual driver. It is a more costly option. It is possible. It really is best to allocate stations in a shared parking space if possible. That way you can have multiple driver accounts take turns on the station, and then you can implement policies to optimize fairness, such as setting idle times. So that way you're setting, a policy to where when a car's stopped charging, that individual has, 30 minutes or an hour grace period to go move their vehicle, and they would be notified. And if not, they would be, maybe hit with a $10 or $20 fee. The HOA can set their own pricing structures and policies to recoup costs, such as charging, per individual driver per kilowatt usage that they're using. Like I mentioned earlier, oftentimes HOAs will look to their utility bill and typically offset or set costs on, what their utility bill is on a month-by-month basis. When it comes to personal charging, I have seen HOAs bill a monthly amount to those individual drivers that have stations in their own parking spaces. So that's another option as far as billing. How it works is typically drivers will use a key fob. So I have a key fob right on my keychain and I just tap the station. And then from there, it's completely linked to the credit card that I have on file. And I will be charged for what I use. So you're able to pull real-time data. You get to see who's charging, how long they're there, etc. So there's all sorts of data that you can pull from these stations, and you can make a hands-off approach to where a vendor helps you get everything set up, and then the drivers are just plugging in their vehicle and they're charged for the policies that the HOA has in place. Getting into the different operating models for EV charging projects. I'll start with discussing the subscription model. This is often called charging as a service in the in the EV space. It's similar to if you were to go out and get a Wi-Fi router, you're paying a monthly amount to have Wi-Fi, right? It's different than a leased option, to where oftentimes EV charging vendors, they don't allow you to purchase the station at the end of the subscription term. So they would own that asset and they would perform a rip and replace in the event that you guys are, done with the stations and you're ready to move on to something else, or you want to go the owned route. So the subscription model requires a much lower entry cost. Oftentimes the vendor will bundle in everything and have it be completely turnkey. And then the HOA or the property management group would pay a monthly allocated amount to have EV charging stations as a service on the property. So it's definitely a shift to OpEx. It's a fully managed approach. And then you're able to future-proof your assets by having a vendor be able to handle everything from install to service, maintenance, and repair and beyond. The other option is the owned offering. Overall, it's a lower cost in the long term. So it's a CapEx approach, and it is a recommended option that I typically recommend for most sites, given that you're able to future-proof your property and plan for the mass adoption of EVs by owning that asset and not having to worry about renewing a subscription down the road, which can get costly. But the subscription model is great. It does provide a lower cost option initially. All right. Some questions to consider. I provided these questions here, just common questions that I like to bring to mind as you're starting to plan for an EV charging project. I'm going to dive into the recommended steps you can take, but I'm just going to leave these questions here on this slide, as these are common questions that I like to present to HOAs or just projects that I work on to kind of help get planning started. The first step I would recommend in the process is to simply just identify your electrification goals. Kind of how many EV drivers do you currently have at the property? Where potentially would be a good place to allocate the stations? Maybe having an electrician come out and doing a site evaluation to get a good understanding of the electrical readiness of the site. Those are all good places to start. The second step, like I mentioned, is to plan the necessary infrastructure needed to get these stations in the ground. And that's going to stem from finding an electrician and working with the trusted EV charging vendor to help navigate recommended hardware, incentives, and help coordinate with the utility. The vendor is going to help provide recommendations for the hardware that's going to be best fit given the electrical readiness and given the site. So there's wall-mounted options, there's pedestals, there's dual port pedestals. There's all sorts of different types of manufacturers out there that may be a better fit for the site. So leveraging an industry professional and asking them questions with what's going to be best for your site and scheduling a site evaluation is a really good place to start. The third step I would recommend is coordinating with the utility provider for a new service upgrade if needed. Oftentimes, sites will need to get a new service. So getting in contact with the utility provider to just get informed with any, permitting requirements or potential new service needed to get these stations in the ground is a great step to take. After that, you would work with your electrician and the installation would occur and you would start charging from there. But to summarize it up, an EV charging vendor and a subject matter expert was going to help you navigate through all these steps from start to finish. So definitely don't be afraid to ask for help when needed. The people that work in this space are truly experienced with working through different sites and different infrastructure and different programs, so they can help you leverage every step of the way. All right. Jumping into some of the tenant survey questions, I've often found that HOAs have found it beneficial to survey tenants with EV charging related questions. These questions on the screen here help you determine short to medium term demand for EV charging, which is going to help you with your future proofing and your planning for the project. They also will help you understand what policies you need to put in place, given the minimum number of hours available for EV charging. So you'll kind of get an understanding of, who's typically commuting to work, who's working from home, how long are their vehicles there, what type of electric vehicles are there, etc. And then they'll also help you determine how many miles are going to be needed to deliver to each driver. For example, if someone's commuting from Los Angeles to Orange County every day, typically they're going to be coming back with their battery probably pretty drained. So they're going to be able to need to be on that station for a little bit longer than usual. So just being able to survey the tenants, getting an idea for who would consider purchasing a vehicle if this would be added is going to help you determine how many ports you're going to need and how many stations may be a good amount to start. Because typically what I see is when HOAs offer this as an amenity, more tenants will be incentivized to go purchase an electric vehicle or go get a plug-in hybrid. So the last thing you want to do is put one station in and then 6 months down the road, you have 2 more EV drivers and now you need to do another project. So it's definitely good to plan for about 10 to 15% more than you need when starting, given that this is a value added amenity in the multifamily space and will cause more tenants to go be incentivized to go get an EV now that they can charge at the convenience of their home. Awesome. Next slide. In conclusion, I'm sure there's a ton of questions. Happy to answer them the best I can, but we are all striving to be a leader for a greener community by decreasing our carbon footprint and creating a more sustainable future. So it's very important that we look to do these projects now and be a leader and take the initiative to make this happen. I'd be lying to say if these projects, they do come with some problems and there is some solutions that we'll have to find, but I'm confident that, we can make this happen. So wanted to thank everybody for attending. Happy to answer any questions, and thanks for the Echo team for having me. Hopefully this presentation was helpful.
You bet. Thank you so much, Gene. And so now we're going to slide on over to Bill Erlinger to talk a little bit about, we have a couple slides there for Bill, and go ahead, take it away, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And good morning. Good morning to all, and thank you for attending today's session. My part here is going to be pretty brief because frankly, there wasn't very much having to do with the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. So moving on to the first slide, please. Thank you. One of the provisions of the IRA, they call it alternative fuel refueling credit. That's a mouthful. In other words, it has to do with electric vehicle charging stations. And I'll get to the point. You might as well forget it. If your property is located in an urban area, then you're not going to be able to get the credit at all. So that was the long and the short of it. Sorry, I'm just a messenger. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, the federal residential solar energy tax credit, as Dee mentioned, is now 30%. It's up from 26%, and the expiration date has been pushed out quite far. So let me say that, first of all, there is no equivalent in California. There's just federal. And secondly, the tax credit does not fall to the homeowner association, believe it or not, and I'll get to that in a minute. It goes to either the third party or it goes to the individual owners. And lastly, is that if any of this money is used to install solar water heating, and that water heating is for a pool, then there is no tax credit available on that installation. You can't heat pool water with it. Okay, so there are 3 different ways that a homeowner association can avail themselves of the credit. As I said, though, they do not get the credit directly themselves. The first way, in fact, I have a client, hopefully they're watching today, this addresses their question. The first way is that if the association itself pays 100% of the cost to install the solar energy equipment, and in the year the work is completed, that means the credit is ripened and it can pass on to the owners. Now, this is an operating and not a reserve expense. In the year that the solar energy equipment is replaced sometime in the future, because it's been in place in the reserve study, then it would be a reserve expenditure. But the first time around, unfortunately, it's an operating expense. Oftentimes, it's going to have to be through a special assessment to the owners. So in the illustration I've got here is to try to make it kind of more intuitive, that the cost to install the solar energy equipment was $120,000, all paid by a special assessment from all the owners. There are 12 owners of the association, and assessments are divided equally among the owners. In other words, each owner paid $10,000 in special assessment. All was used to pay for the installation of solar energy equipment. Now, in the year that the equipment is up and running, that the association notifies each owner here that it's $10,000 that they're entitled to claim on their personal tax return, that they claim it on, there's a form to use on your personal tax return. The credit is now 30%. So each owner is going to get available themselves of a $3,000 tax credit. The association gets no tax benefit whatsoever. Okay, then move on to the next slide. Thank you. Thank you, Don. All right, the next method of acquiring or paying for the solar energy equipment is that the association arranges with a third party who does the installation. Now the third party installs the equipment, and the third party gets the tax credit. And the third party then leases the equipment back to the association and also sells the association electricity. And this is it's a pretty complex and long-term contract. And it definitely needs to be reviewed by HOA legal counsel. Most of these have a provision at the end of a term, 5 to 7 years. The association has the option to acquire the solar property, and not for a bargain purchase, but for a fairly large sum of money. And it's oftentimes, it's a good idea for the association to buy the equipment, but as I say, that's a decision each association needs to consider. And the third method to acquire the solar energy property, it's the same as I just mentioned above. However, the association never buys the property and just continues to lease the equipment, or to just buy the electricity from the third party. And it's, of course, because it's solar, and rather than buying it from the utility, the cost of this electricity is less than it would be if you went to PG&E or some other public utility. All right, so moving on to, I got a polling question here. Which of the three examples is the most widely used? Is it the one where the association pays for the equipment 100%? Is it where the association has an arrangement with a third party and leases the equipment and then buys the equipment? Or is it when the association has a third party install the equipment and leases the equipment and continues to pay electricity to the third party, but never, ever exercises an option to buy the equipment? So 1, 2, or 3, and please let me know what your opinions are.
Okay, Bill, I'll give him about 15 more seconds here.
Okay. Clock is ticking.
Okay, we'll go ahead and stop it here. And here are what people think.
Wow, that's pretty evenly split. The winner happens to be the 25% ones. It's most of the installations are the ones where the association has a third party, the financing, and then at some later time that they're going to buy the equipment back. So, but still pretty evenly split. Thank you for participation. And that concludes my part of the presentation.
Well, thank you, Bill. I think Dave will hop on the mic and we'll get started with our Q&A.
Yeah, that's right. So thank you so much. I think that was really interesting to learn more about that. We're going to go ahead and join the Q&A program now, and this is brought to you by the Heritage Bank of Commerce, Silver Creek Association Management, Kevin Bolden Insurance Agency, Farmers Insurance, and CID Consortium, and the Levy Erlinger and Company LLP CPAs, and that's Bill Erlinger right here. So let's go ahead and take questions. We have 68 questions in the Q&A section. I would suggest that everyone go there and upvote the questions that you want to have answered. With 68, we're probably only going to get a few of them. We'll go to 1150, and so we will be using that. If I can get the panelists, we have all our panelists here. Without, of course, Angela, who had to leave early. So if you wouldn't mind taking a look at those questions as well. And I have here for the most upvotes, 7 upvotes, we have Kevin Bollick. And Kevin asks, have you found that homes with solar panels are more attractive to new buyers of the home? And did it raise the selling price? So I don't know if you have those answers, but maybe there's a realtor in the audience here that could answer something like that in the Q&A section. Any ideas, Bert or Sue? I guess that's probably directly for you. Do you know if solar panels are?
I think the attorney answered that. It was based on how many kW the system is, but I think she said it was a 5 kW system. I believe she said it raised the value of the home $27,000. That's what I heard.
In California?
Yes.
Okay, sounds good. There you go, Kevin. Jay Arnold, is there any guidelines for how a 60-unit condo building can build an EV charging station with batteries that operates on solar power? Any idea there, Dean?
Yeah, there are stations that can operate on solar. It's just I personally am not a subject matter expert on those type of hardware. It can be difficult because a lot of sites are subterranean. So, they're in a parking garage, they don't see any sun. So I'd say probably 95 to maybe more of commercial facing stations in the multifamily space are not running off solar. So they're connected through cellular connectivity or Wi-Fi.
Yeah. But I think large active 55 communities or some of the larger communities out in the desert can certainly
Correct.
do something.
Yeah, there is hardware out there. I just not an expert on it. So
Yeah, connecting to different systems. I used to do this in a previous life. So when I was in the food industry, connecting the systems can be a bit tricky, especially the different inverters and what have you. But it can be done if you're willing to have patience and put a little money into it. Okay, next question here. Let's go to Darby Kremers. What sort of liability would the HOA be exposed to if, in fact, the sound from panels was bothersome to units below the multifamily development, a shared roof, for example? So we don't have our attorney here. So does anybody want to try to tackle that one? I think that's not our realm.
Solar panels don't make noises.
Some do. So it's not the panel itself, it's the rain actually hitting on the panel.
Okay.
And I will guarantee that because our next door neighbor has a solar panel and my son hears it all the time. So when it rains, it only rains like 2 days a year, so it's not a big deal. But yeah, you would have some liability there. But as part of the law, I believe you have to talk to the neighbors and let them know. But there would be some concern. It would be under the nuisance part of your deliberations. But if you do a policy that protects you somewhat, but talk to your attorney. That's the best thing to do, and get your specific answer from them. Kim Myers, let's see. Let's do Kim here. Garages are separate in our condo complex, but electricity to them is paid by the HOA. Can we upgrade the junction boxes as an HOA capital expense and then have individual homeowners pay to install a 220 volt charger in their exclusive use garage with a meter so that we can bill the use? So that's a multitude of questions here. So I guess we have our expert on electricity, so that's probably Bert, and then we have the EV, and of course we have Bill here. So maybe you all can take that question and answer it for Chris.
Let me tell you what bothers me about these chargers that are being installed. My observation is many of them are being installed by handymen and not electricians. There's no permit that's being pulled. Therefore, there's no inspection. And that kind of makes me nervous. When I had mine installed, my charger was by a licensed electrical contractor, and it was inspected by the city. And it's just not an L1450R dryer plug. And that's what a lot of them are using. And that makes me nervous.
Okay, any other comments on that? How do you divide up the bill?
yeah, so like I mentioned, you'd be able to bill per kilowatt hour that individual driver account's using. In the reserve space, keep in mind you would have to pay for hardware costs, installation of that station, and then the annual software reoccurring fees. So it can get very costly in a deeded space. That being said, there is other vendors that provide a lower cost option that don't include a network, so a software behind it. Then the HOA would look at billing a monthly allocated amount for what that's driving their utility bill to be, given that there's no software in the back end to track the charging. So not sure if that helps answer the question there, but when you're looking at a network software services, it can get costly putting a station in a reserved deeded space.
Mhm. And Bill, part of that question was, can they upgrade the junction boxes as part of an HOA capital expense? And that's from the operating funds, I guess. Is that-
Yes, correct. That'd be an operating fund. Although, Dean, a question for you, because I got a call the other day from an association where there's, let's just say there's 10 units, and 3 of the units, the owners installed EV stations, but of course it's common area and they're using common area electricity. So the dilemma was how much should they pay and so forth. And they wanted to know, what their costs were. And I thought, isn't this something that this isn't rocket science? This isn't something, the stations that you recommend installing, would they track the costs so they would know how much their electricity usage was?
Correct. Yeah, they'd be able to track all the costs that are
Okay.
pulled from the station all on the back end. So there's all sorts of reporting that you can pull from the stations. The technology is quite advanced. And then on the back end, the vendor actually handles all that from a billing perspective. So how it works is at the point of sale, the EV charging company, like the vendor, will bill that individual driver, collect the revenue, and then disperse it back to the HOA, either on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis.
Oh, I hope they're watching today.
Yeah.
I-
So there's different transaction fees for the various credit card companies that vendors allow, but typically it's around 96% of revenue would go back to the HOA. So
see.
yeah.
Thank you.
Great, that's good information. John Moore asked with the 9 upvotes again, in attempting to future-proof EV installation, should we expect that charging technology will trend toward requiring higher power, or will newer cars be more efficient in the use of the power? Good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. Like I mentioned, I mean, it's in the multifamily space, typically people are there for several hours, so they're not really worried about charging at crazy fast speeds, given that they're typically plugging their vehicle in for 3 to 4 hours, which level 2 stations are going to give most EVs a full charge in that duration. So I'm not sure if I didn't catch the first part of the question, but I don't think charging speeds are necessarily an issue in multifamily, because multifamily, they just explore level 2 charging. There would be no need for a level 3 DCFC project in the multifamily space. So it's more for corridor charging or off the side of highways. And that's kind of what the NEVI funding is going to roll out. So
yeah, I think what the question is that an HOA is going to consider putting in an EV station, right? And so they put in today's technology or the proven technology. Maybe they're not bleeding edge, but they're cutting edge, but they're just below that. And they put that technology in, but in 6 months or a year, that technology could dramatically change. How do they stay current with that? Can they expect that the technology will change rather rapidly and you'll see some major improvements in efficiency with the equipment? And then conversely, they're asking, will the use of energy in the vehicles be much better going down the road? I think it's probably both. But
got it. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's always evolving. Similar to you look at the iPhone. There's always ISO updates where you can update your iPhone to new firmware. It's the same thing on the back end with software for EV charging stations. Really, what they are, they're smart stations, kind of like smartphones. So to answer the question, yeah, the software is always evolving. There's new features. And then personally, I think we'll get to a point where it will be plug and charge, similar to, how Tesla operates, where, you just plug in the vehicle and then the vehicle is communicating with the charger. So it knows that driver account directly through the vehicle. So we'll remove away from apps, we'll remove from all that. You'll simply just need to plug in your vehicle and it will recognize and track all that utilization. So I think that's where we'll get to. But to answer your question, yes, on the back end, it's always evolving, and that comes with the software and the vendor that you work with.
Okay, so in the EV space, if somebody puts in a system, there's obviously the hardware side of it, then there's the software side of it.
Right.
Should they over design? You said 15 up to 15%, but I mean, you're going to have different gauges of wire or whatever in there. I don't know enough about this to be intelligent about it, but I know enough about electrical stuff that you might have to increase the gauges of the wire. Et cetera.
Yeah.
Should you do that? And then will the EV companies, like EV Connect, do they sign contracts that will update the software and any of the hardware in order to make it work?
Yeah, mostly all like EV Connect, we include that within our software, package, to where all those updates are included as, this progresses. In terms of the first, what was the first part of your question? Oh, yeah, so there's EV charging building codes. So a lot of states, they follow these regulations for new development. So they have to be 20% EV capable and then 2% or 10% EV ready for all new development. So
Okay.
Washington and then a lot of other states and developers are following those codes. The 10% margin I mentioned is a statistic pulled from when stations are added, how many tenants will go out and get an EV. So it's just kind of a number to consider when exploring a project. Maybe we should put in, additional station, even though we might not need it right now.
So this is a capital expenditures. What's the amortization period that we'd use on this? Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, it's tough. That data is tough, but yeah, I mean, I can follow up as well with it as an email or take a call offline to kind of give you a better answer there.
Okay, Bill, do you have any ideas? It's because this is like a computer in a sense, and you're looking at 3 years to write off a computer or so. Is that?
I defer to someone else on the estimated useful lives of this kinds of equipment. Probably say 7 to 10 years.
Yeah, these are going to be pretty important questions down the road as you spend a lot of money to put in your EV charging stations, because it's not like today, and we're running into this with reserve studies today. It's also, you got to plan on it, replacing it and repairing it over the years, and it's something that's going to be a cost, and you need to plan on that as HOA board members. Here's a question for Bert. You haven't, this is for Bert. You haven't paid a PG&E bill for years. How many years will it take to recover the expense of the solar installation at your home? What's your payback?
So if I take into account the tax credit that I got,
Mm-hmm.
And I got batteries. So including the batteries, it's 10 and a half years.
10 and a half years to pay
Mhm.
back. Okay. If a unit owner installs a charging station in their carport space, how do you handle their allowing all their friends from driving in and out to use it? And how is that handled when the HOA installs a station? That's a good question.
Yeah, so upon the stations getting installed, there's an onboarding process. So the vendor will take you through, help guide you through setting all these pricing policies and plans to restrict, the general public from seeing your stations and being able to use it. So the ports would be locked in the event that the HOA sets it up to where if someone with an email address or a phone number is not recognized, they're not able to charge. So it's simple as just setting up a plan in the platform to implement that policy.
Mm-hmm. And then have you done anything with somebody who hands over the key fob to use the station? I mean, to their friends or their family?
Yeah, so a situation like that, I mean, you certainly can go back in and import a new driver account for like a guest that's going to be arriving to the property, or a phone number and email with that driver. But if you scan a key fob and plugged in a different electric vehicle, it would recognize that it's not the vehicle linked to your account. So
okay.
It wouldn't allow you to charge. So, but yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, we'll text the solution there, I guess, and it'll help handle this. I can see that there would be a problem of having a lot of people driving in just to use the charging station. So that could be a problem for an HOA.
I was going to mention that we have tried at Oakmont at our central complex, which is our largest gym and where our offices and the theater is. We cannot get anybody to come out and install EV stations without us paying for it.
Interesting. Okay. All right, so let's see the time check. We got 10 minutes or so. Let's talk. John Moore asks, how does the installation of solar panels on a flat roof affect the maintenance, repair, and replacement of the roof over time? And do you have any? That's I think pretty specific. Does anybody have any comments on that? I don't think we have experts in that area. So we're gonna pass on that one. Sorry, John. And let's see, Paul Heller. Our HOA has installed an EV charger in the garage, but we're told we have maxed out on the number we can have. Any thoughts? So they maxed out.
Yeah, you may look, the only option may be to go into the utility and getting a new service. If you're maxed out on the power, then there may be some electrical upgrades needed. Or you could look to having an electrician come out to see what potential solutions may be able to happen, but typically, you're going to need to upgrade from a new service.
Got it. Thank you. James asks, for shared charging, are there apps available for notification when an EV is charged so that it can be moved and provide timely access to the next EV?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, that's just the idle time. So the HOA can set policies whether they want to allow the maximum to be 3 hours or 4 hours that someone could charge. From there, once your vehicle is approaching the duration of it being charged, you'll get a notification within a 30-minute or a 60-minute window. And then if you leave your car on there after it's completed charged, you can set a timeline to where that driver is going to be charged a fee if they don't go move their vehicle. So all of that is done on the back end.
Okay, and then Nikki asked a question, what about tiled roofs? Are there options for solar panels on tiled roofs? I got to think there are. Did you at Oakmont come across any of those by any chance? I think you have.
We have very few tile roofs. I know it's tile roofs are very delicate, so I'm sure the cost to put up the rigging for the solar panels is going to be a lot more expensive than a regular roof.
Where I lived before, panels were put on tile roof, so it can be done. But I suspect having more people walking up there is really the concern for breaking down the tiles.
I think installers probably have a solution. So I think there are options. I don't think it's going to be easy, but there likely are solutions out there. So Charlotte Wheeler asks, I live in a townhouse condo community. I have a charger in my carport. My question is, am I still required by law to carry $1 million liability and name my HOA as an additionally insured on my homeowner's insurance policy? Is it an onerous requirement naming my HOA as an additional insured? That's a legal question. I think I'm going to defer that to your legal counsel. The presenter here, Angela, mentioned that there was some limitations on what's appropriate and what's a certain level. I do know that there is and there has been a great deal of conversation about an additional cost because there is liability when you put a charging station in. And so there is going to be something in there that requires that. And that's probably a policy of the HOA, and it's probably made available to the homeowner before they actually do a project. So you can make a decision whether you want to do it or not. Okay. Nancy, So any recommendations on finding a site evaluation expert for EV charging stations? Any sample tenant surveys available that we could use, could model ours on? Site evaluation experts are usually provided by the EV companies, I assume, or the solar companies, right?
Correct. So most EV vendors have qualified certified electricians under their network that they partner with that can perform site evaluations. I'm happy to share the tenant surveys out with everyone. I can send it to Connor after the webinar today for you guys to utilize. But yeah, typically those site evaluations are stemmed through the EV charging vendor.
Right. And just a reminder, we will be sending out the slides and this recording to everyone after it's over, and Connor can put those in that email. Michelle Diamond asked, in regards to EV chargers, our common area electrical panels are not capable of handling EV chargers. And that's it's a question here, are not capable of handling EV chargers. So they're, are there, we don't know, what we have to look at your panels. We are in the process of getting common areas for EV chargers. Is this acceptable in terms of the law? Does that make sense to you? A question?
Yeah, I would say just typically go to the utility, for questions like that. You can address any permitting requirements and then submit a site evaluation from your electrician to the utility. And if there's any laws or permitting issues, then they'll make you aware of that. But typically a vendor will work with you with that as well to kind of help answer that gray area there.
Okay, so that's great. So that's good. Let's just take one more question here from Robbie Realtor. Angela, do you assist HOAs in revising and or updating their CC&Rs and in regards to current laws and rules for language for EV chargers and solar panels? She's not here, but I would suggest you give her a call and ask her that question. That would be a wonderful question to ask. I'm sure she'd be really happy to get a call. HOA attorneys generally, that's an area of practice for them, and most HOA attorneys will spend a time, because they've written, many of them have written many of these policies in the past, so they have a lot of them. I'm not saying that she has, and I don't know, so we'll just go there. Okay, I'm going to take this one from Miguel. If a homeowner is installing a 220 fast charger in their personal garage, but the installer says that the main breaker panel for the building, 7 units, needs to be upgraded, does that have to fall on the association or the homeowner? Any idea on that, Dean?
Sorry, do you mind repeating the question real quick, David?
Sure.
Yeah.
If the homeowner is installing a 220 fast charger in their personal garage, but the installer says that the main breaker panel for the building, for all 7 units in the building, needs to be upgraded, does that fall on the association or the homeowner, the cost of updating the panel?
Yeah, so that would fall most likely on the homeowner if they're looking to upgrade that panel. And
right.
I would imagine, but a 220 volt is not a fast charger. So that's DC fast charging is 480 volt service, and that's a direct current. 220 or 240 volt, I think what they mentioned is your standard level 2 charging station. So but yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that one.
We appreciate it. Yeah, DC Miguel's in New Mexico, so he wins the prize for the furthest distance. So I wanted to get him in here. So thank you all for today's event. I'm going to move on and close out this question and answer and finish up with our final end of session comments and concluding remarks. Again, I want to thank our sponsors, Heritage Bank, Silver Creek Association Management, Kevin Bolin Insurance Company, and CID Consortium LLC, and the Levy Erlinger Company for sponsoring today's program. Please use thank you to our ECHO members for coming today and supporting our ongoing ECHO webinars. For those of you joining us today who are not members, you are invited to become members. You can join by going to www.echo-ca.org and clicking on the membership tab. In 2023, ECHO plans to hold more than 70 online events, 3 in-person educational seminars, and more than 30 in-person resource panels. Further, ECHO is celebrating its 50th anniversary, and we have a special activities planned throughout the year, including our grand anniversary celebration, tentatively scheduled for either Friday, May 5th or May 12th of 2023. Be on the lookout for further information as we confirm the exact date, time, and location. We hope to see you all at the 50th anniversary celebration. In 2023, we are hoping to grow our membership significantly. We ask that our friends and members help us in this regard by asking a community or member to join ECHO. Sometimes all it takes is for a single person with influence to ask the question of a board member, a committee, or club member, simply to join ECHO, and we have been very pleased with the response. People just don't know about us, and so if you mention it, please do. We do a lot of free programming so they can try us out and make it available to them. And I also want to say thank you to everyone here today for joining us. Your participation as an ECHO member and as a member of this esteemed group is much appreciated, and we appreciate your investment in making a better HOA community. And now for other announcements. Our next in-person event is the North Bay Resource Panel on November 9th. That's next week. The topic is HOA pressure to accommodate EV charging stations and solar panels. So this will be a fun one. If you want to go, it's going to be in Novato, and Karen St. Ange from the law offices of Adam Sterling's will be there to discuss it. If interested, space is limited, and we'll need to order your lunch. You might want to call Connor after this meeting, and he'll hook you up with the connection to the link to go to the event. It'll be a lot of fun. It is in person. On November 16th, the Central Coast Resource Panel will meet in Santa Cruz at the Santa Cruz Library. The topic of that discussion is water damage and mold awareness, and we have a restoration company coming to speak on that. Also, we invite any HOA board members or former board members to join the ECHO HOA Board Members Club. The club meets online every second Tuesday of the month from 5:30 to 7 p.m. Our chair is Miguel Sanchez. Please join other board members for an interactive peer-to-peer learning experience. Our next board members club meeting is November 8th, which is next Tuesday, and the discussion topic will be water costs during drought and managing environmental costs. If interested, please click on the sign-up sheet provided in the packet or email Patty Curzett at pcurzett@echo-ca.org, or just ask Connor. And a quick shout out to our friends at the new ECHO Club at Rossmore. We had our first meeting a couple of weeks ago discussing rising insurance costs, and the conversation was very informative and helpful, although maybe a bit unpleasant at times because of the costs are going up. Once again, thank you to our sponsors who made this webinar possible, and to all of you for attending today. ECHO appreciates your investment in education to build a better HOA community